The Cessna hit the tarmac at Presidio County Regional with a sound like a fist on a table, and Jake Hollis gripped the armrest and reminded himself, for the fourth time since San Antonio, that small planes were statistically safer than the drive ahead. He didn't believe it, but he found it useful. He was the only passenger. The pilot, a leathery man who'd introduced himself as Dub, had said 11 words total during the flight. The last 7. Sorrow Springs, about 40 minutes from here. Said the way you say, end of the road, not as a direction, but as a verdict. Jake unfolded from the cabin and stood on cracked asphalt in October heat, already losing its argument with the coming dark. The airport was the size of a strip mall, one terminal, a windsock on a rust-eaten pole, a corrugated steel hangar with its doors open on darkness that went deeper than it should. No other aircraft on the ground. One man leaning against a county SUV with 200,000 miles on its panels, drinking from a thermos lid. Chief Royce Miller looked older than his photograph. In the welcome packet, he'd looked like a solid man running to gray. In person, he looked like something baked slowly and drained of moisture, skin tight over wide cheekbones, eyes the color of desert at dusk, neither brown nor gold, but somewhere between that had no name. 60 years old, and every one of them earned. "Hollis," he said. "Chief." Jake extended his hand. Miller shook it once, brief, the way you'd confirm a transaction. "One bag?" "One bag." Miller put the duffel in the back and got behind the wheel. Jake took the passenger seat. The engine turned over on the second try. They pulled onto a 2-lane highway stretching west through empty land until the curvature of the earth swallowed it. Miller drove and didn't talk. Jake watched the landscape and tried to find the right word for it. Empty was accurate, but inadequate. Desolate was closer. It implied something had once been here and chosen to leave. Rock formations rose in rust-red columns from pale earth. Low scrub clung to the ground with stubborn, joyless persistence. Dry riverbeds carved like old scars across the terrain. The sky was enormous and clear, fading to the specific shade of blue that comes at the end of a hot day, when everything casts a shadow longer than it deserves. At the 25-minute mark, Miller reached into the center console without looking, produced a laminated card the size of an index card, and held it out without a word. Jake took it. The card was old, yellowed lamination, cracked at one corner, but the text inside was clear, retyped in a clean font at some point, as if whoever maintained it understood that legibility was non-negotiable. At the top, in bold, the Epsilon program, Sorrow Springs PD. Below it, 5 numbered rules. Jake read them once, then again. 1. If you hear your own name whispered in the canyons or dry riverbeds after sunset, do not answer. Do not even turn your head. Walk directly back the way you came. 2. If the natural sounds of the desert suddenly stop, find shelter immediately. It is listening. Do not move or make a sound until the natural chorus returns. 3. If you hear a voice you recognize calling for help from an impossible location, it is not real. Walk away. 4. When patrolling desert roads at night, keep your radio on at a low volume. If the static abruptly clears, pull over, turn off your engine, and sit in absolute silence for 10 minutes. 5. If a profound silence falls and the air grows cold and dry, do not run. Press your back against the nearest solid object and breathe as quietly as you can into your sleeve until the feeling passes. He looked at Miller. Miller kept his eyes on the road. "Is this a hazing thing?" Jake asked, genuinely uncertain. "No." Flat and final. Jake read all 5 rules a third time, the way you read something when the first 2 passes haven't made it any less strange. Then he put the card in his breast pocket and stared out the window and did not ask anything else. Sorrow Springs announced itself with a green highway sign and a population number Jake clocked as lower than his old Austin apartment building, a gas station, a diner called Connie's with a lit open indicator in the window, a hardware store, a Baptist church with a reader board that said, "He hears everything," which might have been comforting under different circumstances. The police station sat back from Main Street behind two flagpoles, both flags hanging still in the windless air. A dispatcher named Terry gave him a key card, a locker number, and a form to sign. She watched him with the expression of someone who has seen this scene before and is waiting to see how this version ends. "Sergeant Kowalski takes you through orientation," Miller said from his office doorway. "She'll find you at 7 tomorrow." He went in and closed the door. Jake found his locker and paused before opening it. A habit from Austin, the brief moment before committing to whatever comes next. Inside, a fresh uniform, a duty belt with all hardware mounted, boots, and a flashlight rated for 1,000 lumens. On the shelf above everything, a second laminated card, identical to the first. He stared at it a moment, then changed and walked across to Connie's. Sergeant Sarah Kowalski was in the far corner of the diner, back to the wall, door in her sight line. She'd been there first and had been watching him cross from the station. She raised 2 fingers. He sat across from her. She looked like the landscape, made by the same process, slowly, under consistent pressure. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, tan that went below the surface, short iron gray hair, eyes that read him in a glance and kept their conclusions, black coffee, no food ordered. "You read the card?" she said. 3 times. "Good." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "Save your questions. I don't explain the rules in a diner. Tonight you eat, you sleep, you know the card without looking. Tomorrow I show you the geography. After that, you'll understand the rules from the inside, not the outside. There's a difference." Jake watched her steadily. "You're not going to tell me what the rules are protecting against?" "Tonight? No." "Because it's complicated? Or because you'd rather not say it here?" Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, but a recognition. The look you give something that might actually be useful. "The second one," she said. He ordered a burger. She sat with her coffee and said nothing further of substance. He learned she'd been with the department 20 years, that she'd transferred here voluntarily. She did not explain why. He didn't ask. When he walked back to the small apartment above the station arranged for his first month, the night was cooling fast. The stars above Sorrow Springs were extraordinary, overwhelming rather than beautiful, the sky overloaded with light in a way that felt like exposure, like standing in a room with no walls, the distance in every direction vast and indifferent. He lay in bed and read the card a final time by phone screen glow. The quiet outside his window was not the lowered city ambient he'd always called silence. It was the actual absence of sound, a patience to the air, deep and unhurried, as if the desert was simply waiting. He fell asleep with the card on the nightstand and slept without dreaming, which would later feel like the last uncomplicated rest he would have in Sorrow Springs for a very long time. Kowalski picked him up at 7 in a cruiser smelling of old coffee and gun oil. Shadows were still long, every rock throwing a hard line across pale ground. She drove east, then south, then west, along the canyon road. The full picture before the lesson started. She identified landmarks without sentiment. The canyon system, 6 miles south of the highway. The old cemetery on the hill above town, its wrought iron fence intact. Residents dating to the 1880s. The dry riverbed winding northeast into a maze of rock formations. And at the end of a rutted dirt track 10 miles from town, a stone structure against the sky, the abandoned mission of San Augustine, its bell tower incomplete, walls the color of old bone. "Hot zones," she said, pointing to each. "Never approach those 3 alone. You tell dispatch your location and you're back before dark. Non-negotiable." "What makes them hot zones?" "Topography. The canyons trap and amplify sound. The cemetery is elevated and exposed on all sides. The mission is isolated. Thick limestone chapel walls that reflect at a specific low frequency." She glanced at him briefly. "At all 3, you treat sound as a tactical element. Nothing unnecessary." "What's unnecessary sound?" "Anything you generate without thinking about whether you should. Talking, whistling, music, anything automatic." A pause. "This job is about thinking before you make noise." Jake let that settle. "You're describing a permanent operational posture." "Welcome to Sorrow Springs," she said, and there was no humor in it. She told him about the disappearances, enough of them. 3 hikers in the canyon system over the past decade. A rancher who went to check a fence line and didn't come back. A highway patrol officer from the next county found in his locked car one morning, no trauma, mouth open, face frozen in what the medical examiner initially wrote as extreme affective distress and then crossed out and changed to terror. Jake had read that file and attributed it to cardiac event and heat stroke. He kept that to himself. They parked at the main canyon rim in the early afternoon, a deep slash in the earth, walls dropping 60 feet to a pale, dry floor of rock and dead brush. Kowalski cut the engine. "Listen," she said. Jake listened. Wind. A mockingbird below cycling through borrowed songs, the tick of the cooling engine. Then the sounds thinned. The mockingbird stopped. The wind died. The engine ticked twice more and fell quiet. The silence that replaced everything did not arrive gradually. It hit a threshold and was suddenly total, and it did not feel like absence. It felt like the presence of something that had displaced the sound, a faint pressure against his ears, a change in the quality of the air that he could not put into language and therefore could not dismiss. He did not move. He realized he had stopped breathing and quietly started again. From below, from the deepest shadow of the canyon, where the walls narrowed to a slot no wider than a doorway, a voice came up. "Hello? Is someone up there? I'm lost." A child's voice. Clear as something struck rather than spoken, hard-edged, with a long resonance that had no business rising from 60 feet of solid rock canyon. Impossibly close. It reached past his hearing into something older, the pre-rational directive that said, "Respond, go, help, now." Jake's hand moved to the door handle. Kowalski's hand closed on his arm. The grip was not gentle. It had the force of someone preventing something irreversible. She didn't look at him. She looked through the windshield at the far rim of the canyon, where rock formations stood against the sky like broken teeth, still and somehow attentive. She shook her head once. He let go of the handle. "Please," the voice came again, patient and unchanged. "I can hear you up there. I can hear you breathing." Jake stared ahead. His pulse was loud in his own ears, a sound he had never before considered as a sound, now nakedly audible in the silence of the cab. He pressed his lips together, breathed through his nose, steadily, quietly, trying not to exist too loudly. He held himself still and counted breaths, and did not allow himself to think about what was below them. What kind of thing could send a child's voice 60 feet straight up with that clarity, or whether it had heard the knock of his hand on the door handle. A coyote called from the east, then a second, farther out. The wind returned, lifting dry scrub at the canyon rim. Then the mockingbird resumed mid-phrase, cycling through its borrowed library with complete unconcern. Kowalski started the car. She drove back without speaking, and the silence between them in the cab was a different kind, simply the quiet of two people with nothing adequate to say, in the shared understanding that the inadequacy was mutual and acceptable. Jake watched the desert pass in the late afternoon light. 14 years in Austin. Patrol, violent crimes, a shooting review, a marriage that had come apart under wrong, persistent wait. He had asked for this transfer because he wanted something simpler. He had used that word specifically in his request. He watched the rock formations go by. I didn't know what that word meant. "People get lost out here, Jake," Kowalski said, as the gas station came into view at the edge of town. Eyes on the road. "They always have. Most of them just wander until they can't. But some..." She chose the words carefully. "Some get found. By something that was lost first." She pulled in and left the engine running. "Tomorrow, I'll start on the rules." He got out and stood in the parking lot as the cruiser pulled away, staying there a moment in the last warm October light, listening to the ordinary sounds around him. A screen door somewhere, a distant dog, the refrigeration hum of the gas station. Normal, present, grounded. He took the laminated card from his breast pocket. This time he did not read it as eccentricity or hazing or local color. He read it as what it plainly was: instructions for surviving something that had just called to him in a child's voice from the bottom of a 60-foot canyon and told him it could already hear him breathing. He folded the card, put it in his pocket. He went inside. The week passed, the way weeks do when you are paying close attention to everything, slowly in the hours and quickly when you looked back at the whole of it. Jake settled into the rhythms of Sorrow Springs PD, morning briefings that lasted 12 minutes, a patrol log covering 400 square miles that recorded, on an average day, 0 incidents. He drove the same 3 routes Kowalski had shown him, logged his mileage, and submitted end-of-shift reports to Terry, who filed them somewhere without comment. The canyon incident did not leave him. He hadn't expected it to. 14 years as a cop had taught him that the things staying with you aren't always the things that hurt. Sometimes they are simply the things that refuse to fit the world you believe you are living in. And that child's voice from 60 feet below the canyon floor was the most dissonant thing he had encountered in a long career. He didn't speak about it. He didn't write it in the log. But when the radio static dropped even slightly during a drive, he noticed it the way you notice a room going quiet when the wrong person walks in. He read the laminated card every morning before shift. The rules were memorized by day 3, but reading them felt like the responsible thing, the way a pilot runs a pre-flight check on a plane he has flown 1,000 times. The rules are not useful if you remember them in theory. They are only useful in the exact moment when your body is already moving. By midweek, Kowalski cleared him for solo patrol. She delivered this with the tone of a weather report. "You're on the West Loop tomorrow night." He nodded and went home and read the card twice before turning off the light. The West Loop ran 28 miles out along a state highway that became a county road, then curved back north through open desert before rejoining the main highway west of the station. He left at 11:15 Tuesday night with the radio on at low volume, static running, exactly as Rule 4 required. The night was clear and cold. The highway ran straight through the dark, his headlights cutting a corridor. The stars were out in force, too many of them, the sky overloaded in the way he still hadn't gotten used to. No moon. The scrub and formations were barely visible on either side, shapes against a deeper darkness. For the first 40 minutes, nothing happened. The radio hissed. The heater ran. A jackrabbit appeared at the 20-mile mark, froze in the headlights with the dignity of something that had decided not to be afraid of him, then vanished. He reached the turnaround marker and called in. Terry confirmed his location. He turned the cruiser around and started back. He was 4 miles into the return when the static died. Not faded, cut. Total and immediate, the speakers going from white noise to an absolute silence that seemed louder than the static had been. One moment it was there, the next it was not. Jake's hands tightened on the wheel. He breathed in through his nose, out through his nose. He pulled off the highway, put the cruiser in park, killed the engine, and turned off the headlights. The darkness pressed in with the completeness that only empty desert at a moonless midnight could produce. No ambient glow, no reflected light, nothing. He did not move. The cold came in fast, in a series of small, distinct falls rather than a gradual drop, as if something outside was drawing warmth from the air in careful, measured increments. He pressed his mouth against his jacket sleeve, breathed in, breathed out. The fabric was warm against his lips. He concentrated on that, the ordinary texture, the small sound of his careful breath moving through it. Outside his window, the desert was silent. Not quiet, silent. The distinction had become meaningful to him over the past week. Quiet had texture, distant calls, wind across open ground. Silence was different. Silence was a removal, as if the desert's voice had been switched off at a source that had no business having that kind of control. He had felt it once before at the canyon rim, and his body remembered it even as his mind tried to stay professional. His pulse was loud in his ears. He watched the window and saw nothing but dark. He counted seconds the way he'd learned in training, building minutes from the ground up. At the 6-minute mark, something changed. Not a sound, a quality shift. The way a room feels different when someone has walked into it before you've turned to see who. He became aware, with a certainty that bypassed his professional skepticism entirely, that something was standing very close to his window. He did not turn his head. He breathed into his sleeve, one careful breath at a time, and counted, and did not think about 7 feet of desiccated height and hollow eye sockets, and the vertical gash where a mouth should be. He tried not to think about the single pane of glass between his face and whatever was on the other side of it. The cold deepened. His breath condensed visibly in the dark of the cab. At the 9-minute mark, the pressure lifted, not gradually, but as a release, a specific moment when the weight was simply gone. He counted to 12 anyway. Then the static burst back with a sharp hiss and settled into its normal low crackle. He put his hand flat on the dashboard and breathed, really breathed, for a full minute, Then he started the engine, turned on the headlights, pulled back onto the highway, and drove to the station with his hands at 10 and 2 and the radio hissing steadily beside him. The rules had held. That was what mattered. The search began at 5:40 the following morning. A rancher named Ardell Beecham had called dispatch at midnight. His 19-year-old son, Cole, had gone out at noon the previous day to walk the eastern fence line and had not returned for supper, had not returned by dark, had not returned by midnight. 8 hours overdue. Jake arrived at 5. Kowalski was already there in tactical gear over a topographic map. Miller stood beside her in a canvas jacket, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, studying the map with the expression of a man reading a page he did not enjoy. Cole Beecham, 19, Kowalski said, experienced in the terrain, knows the basic protocols his father taught him, went out before dark, which means something happened between noon and sunset. She folded the map. You stay on my left, 3 yards back. If you hear your name at any point, stop and wait for visual confirmation. You understand what I mean. I see you, Jake said. Not just here. Correct. The eastern terrain was flat in stretches but broken by limestone formations creating narrow passages and shallow ravines, geography that looked navigable from a distance and became disorienting the moment you stepped into it. Ardell Beecham met them at the property gate and pointed them in. His face had the quality of a man who had been awake all night, holding hope by its edge. They found the first boot print at the quarter-mile mark, work boot tread in a soft patch near a fence post. Then another. A steady walking pace heading northeast. Kowalski followed without comment. Jake tracked on her left. Miller moved behind, slower, his eyes working the terrain for something the prince alone couldn't tell him. The tracks continued for a mile and a half. Then they stopped. Not gradually. Sequential and clear, and then a single deep impression, as if the walker had planted their foot hard and suddenly, and then nothing. The earth beyond was undisturbed. No fall, no drag marks, no blood. The desert simply resumed, as if Cole Beecham had ceased to leave marks on it. They stood around the last print in silence. Miller crouched, studied it, straightened, and turned slowly, scanning. 2 ravines ran in different directions. The limestone walls were close on both sides. Kowalski moved left into the western ravine. Miller took the eastern line. Jake held the middle ground, the morning light still low, the ravine shadows dense. He heard Kowalski working to his left, Miller's deliberate footsteps to his right, the wind beginning its low, dry note across limestone. Then he heard his name. Jake. Kowalski's voice, exactly her voice. The flat, unhurried register, the economical way she weighted the single syllable. It came from behind him, or possibly from the narrow slot between the 2 formations directly ahead. The ravine acoustics made direction unreliable. He stopped walking. He did not answer. He did not turn his head. Rule 1. Do not answer. Do not even turn your head. Walk directly back the way you came. He could not walk back without passing the slot, so he stayed still and waited. Jake. Again. Same register, no urgency, just a name spoken to get attention. He kept his lips together. Did not respond. 40 seconds after the first call, he heard Kowalski's actual footsteps, the specific, purposeful cadence of someone who has moved on foot in this terrain for 20 years. Continuous, trackable, coming from the left, from the western ravine. He waited until he could see her. She emerged, looked at him standing still in the open ground, and her face stayed neutral. But something behind it changed. She crossed to him in 10 steps. She looked at the slot between the formations. Then she took his arm and walked him east without a word. They searched for another hour. They found Cole Beecham's backpack at the mouth of the second eastern ravine, green canvas with his initials on the strap, sitting upright as if placed deliberately. Both buckles fastened, no food missing, water bottle inside, phone inside, battery dead. The ground around it was entirely unmarked. Whatever had separated the boy from his pack had left nothing on the earth. Miller stood over it for a long moment. Then he picked it up and carried it out. Ardell Beecham was on the hood of his truck when they returned. He looked at the pack and didn't speak. Miller carried it to him. The rancher held it against his chest with both arms and stared at the eastern terrain over Miller's shoulder with the eyes of a man who already understood what the silence meant. Back at the station, Kowalski filed the report. Jake sat in Miller's office. The chief closed the door. 2 encounters this week, Miller said. 3, counting the canyon. The canyon was Kowalski's. The last 2 were yours. He looked at Jake. You handled them correctly. I know the rules. Most people who know them still answer. The reflex to respond to your own name is one of the deepest things in a person. A fact stated without judgment. The fact that you didn't either time means you have the right instincts. Jake looked at the desk. We didn't find the boy. No. His pack was placed there, upright, buckled. That's not dropping. That's setting down. I know. Which means it got close enough to listen. He paused, and then it followed him. When it gets close enough to listen, It learns a person, Miller said. The voice, the heartbeat, the specific way you breathe when you're frightened. It catalogs all of it. Then it follows until the right moment, when you're alone and quiet, and it can work without interruption. A pause. Cole made a sound. He spoke, most likely, and so it learned him. The rules protect against being taken, Jake said slowly, not against being learned. Miller nodded. Once it knows your sound, the only tool is held silence. Indefinitely, if necessary. That's what the rules are. They are the architecture of held silence. Jake thought about 12 minutes in a dark cruiser, the breath into his sleeve, the cold coming in increments. How long has this been going on? He asked. The documented record goes back to the 1890s. Disappearances in the canyons, along the old road that ran where the highway runs now. The Apache who lived here before us had words for it. The closest translation I've found is the one that collects. They didn't write rules. They passed them mouth to ear, generation to generation. He glanced at the laminated card on his desk. We wrote them down. That's the main difference. Who compiled them? 12 officers over 80 years. Each one added what they survived. I added 2 myself. He did not say which. Every rule on that card is the direct result of someone in that exact situation finding the one response that let them walk away. He met Jake's eyes. We're not just cops here, son. We're the shepherds, and our flock has something hunting it. Jake let the words settle. He felt them drop into the space the canyon and the dark highway and the green backpack had already made room for. He was almost at the door when Miller spoke again. You did well this week, Hollis. He didn't look up. The ones who do well in the first week either keep doing well or they don't come back at all. I'm glad you're the first kind. Jake went home in the late afternoon and made something approximate to dinner and sat at the kitchen table with the laminated card in front of him. The sounds of the house were normal and present. The refrigerator's hum, the wall clock, a dog barking 2 streets over. He read the card once, then he put it back in his breast pocket, where it had lived since day 1. Outside, the last of the sun went down over the desert, and the night came in cold and still. Jake Hollis sat at his kitchen table and listened to his house, and was very careful about what he let himself say out loud. He had moved out of the station apartment at the start of his 2nd week. Miller had suggested it. There's a rental on the east side, Carver Place, single bedroom, month to month. Give you some distance from the work. And Jake had taken the keys without asking what kind of distance he meant. The house was small and brown, and sat at the last address on its street before the asphalt surrendered to a dirt track running east into the desert. It had a refrigerator that hummed in a specific key, and a wall clock in the kitchen that ticked with a slightly off rhythm. 2 salt cedar trees in the backyard rattled when the south wind came in. The nearest neighbor was 100 yards up the road. His first night there, he'd lain awake listening to the house's sounds and deciding he liked them, their specificity, the way they confirmed the night was ordinary. He had been in the house 9 days when the silence came. It was a Thursday in late October. He was off duty, had eaten, had watched television for 2 hours without retaining any of it, and had turned it off at 9:30. He took the laminated card from his breast pocket, read it once at the kitchen table, set it down. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, the south wind moved through the salt cedars with its low, papery sound. A familiar presence by now, heard without thinking, the way you hear a house you've lived in long enough. At 10:11, the cedars went quiet. He noticed it before he understood it. The small, puzzled attention of someone registering a change before the mind has named it. Then it named itself. The wind had dropped to nothing, and in that nothing was a quality he recognized. A removal. Not the quiet of a calm night, but the quiet of something that had arrived and displaced the night's voice for its own purposes. He turned off the kitchen light and moved to the living room without turning on anything else. He sat on the floor with his back against the interior wall, the one with no windows, pulled his knees up, and breathed in through his nose and out through his nose. The refrigerator's hum receded and thinned, the way a sound behaves when a larger silence presses in around it. Then it stopped, not the click and sigh of a normal cycle, just a cessation, as if the sound had been absorbed. The clock ticked 3 more times and went still. The cold came. Not a single drop. A series of measured decrements, each one a degree below the last, the air growing dry and thin the way it does at altitude. He pressed his mouth and nose into his jacket sleeve, breathed in, breathed out, slow, quiet, keeping the sound of himself as small as possible inside the dark. Then the knocking started. Not at the door. Inside the walls. 3 slow beats, moving along the north wall from the hallway toward the living room corner, as if something were walking the perimeter of the house outside and pressing each footfall against the surface as it passed. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Patient, methodical, unhurried. The rhythm of something with no reason to rush. Jake breathed into his sleeve and did not move. The knocking moved to the ceiling. He understood, in the part of his mind still working professionally, that the house was single-story, and that whatever was above him was not bound by the normal mechanics of roof access. He kept his eyes forward in the dark. He let the ceiling do what it was going to do. Then the voices began. The first was Linda. They had been married 6 years. He had not spoken to her in 8 months. He would have known her voice anywhere. It had lived inside the architecture of his daily life for too long to leave cleanly when the marriage did. She said his name first, the way she always said it when she was worried, soft and at the front door. Jake. Then, Jake, please, let me in. Something's wrong and I don't know where I am and it's so dark out here. Please just let me in. It came from the front door with perfect clarity. He pressed his sleeve harder against his mouth. The reflex was complete and immediate, the reflex of a person hearing someone they loved in distress, and it took the full force of his professional discipline to hold himself against the wall. The rules lived in his body now, not just his memory. He had put them there deliberately, reading the card every morning, and it was the body that held him when the mind was being taken apart. Do not answer. Do not respond. Acknowledging it is fatal. Linda's voice cycled through the registers he knew best. The quiet plea, the higher urgent pitch, the flat final statement that had always been her last resort. The echo knew every variation. It had stood beside his car window 11 nights ago on the west loop shoulder and listened to his heartbeat and breathing for 6 uninterrupted minutes, cataloging the frequencies of the fear that his particular memories produced. It had been patient. It had been thorough. Now it was spending what it had saved. He did not move. He did not make a sound. Linda's voice stopped. His mother's voice came from the backyard. She had been dead 3 years. Her name was Carol, and she had grown up in East Texas and carried that geography in her speech her entire life. And there was no voice in his experience that carried more authority over his nervous system than hers. Jake, honey, I'm in the yard. Come look at the stars with me. You always loved the stars. Come outside for just a minute. He put his forehead on his knees. He breathed, slow and even, his sleeve against his mouth, sitting in the dark while his mother's voice asked him twice more to come outside. He held himself in the grammar of the rules compiled from 12 officers over 80 years, each one added by someone who had survived the exact situation it described, built for this moment. For the moment when every instinct pointed toward the wrong thing, and the only counterweight was a laminated card and the discipline to believe it. Carol's voice faded. The cold deepened further, his breath condensed visibly in the dark, small, pale clouds disappearing immediately. The dryness had a specific edge now, the edge he associated with proximity, with the thing being close enough that he could feel its absence of warmth as a physical presence against his skin. His police radio was on the kitchen counter, off duty, dark. Terry's voice came from it on the dispatch channel, flat and professional. "All units, structure fire reported at the station. All available personnel respond immediately. Hollis, are you on? Hollis, please respond." His hand moved before his mind did. He was halfway to standing, reaching toward the counter where his keys sat, before something surfaced through the adrenaline and stopped him. He stood half-risen in the dark kitchen, one hand extended, and forced himself to think precisely. The radio is off. It has been off since 4 this afternoon. There is no transmission. There is no fire. Terry is at home. He lowered himself to the floor. He sat against the kitchen cabinet, back against solid wood, breathed into his sleeve, and did not touch his keys. The dispatch voice tried once more, this time with Miller's voice layered underneath, calling his name in the background as if standing in smoke and shouting. Then it stopped. The knocking resumed from under the floorboards. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Working from the kitchen toward the hallway. He sat against the cabinet and managed himself the way he had managed himself through the worst nights of his career. The shooting review, the night his mother was gone, the Tuesday Linda laid the divorce papers on the table and left without sitting down. He had a technique for it. Nothing mystical. Acknowledge the present facts. I am on the floor of my kitchen. The floor is solid. The cabinet is solid. The rules are holding. The night will end. Then the child's voice came from outside the bedroom window. "Please, officer, help me. It's dark and I can't find my way. Please, officer, I can hear you in there." Sobbing. The specific helpless sob of a young child alone in the dark. Every register of it aimed precisely at the part of him that had put on a badge and kept it on for 14 years because he believed the work mattered. This was the core of who he was professionally, and the echo had found it and was using it with the same precision it had used Linda's voice and his mother's voice and the sound of his radio. It had mapped him. It knew which frequencies would move him, and it was moving through them in sequence, patient and relentless. He wept. He could not stop that. The tears came without sound. He understood now that sound was the one thing he absolutely could not give. But they came anyway. He sat on the kitchen floor in the dark with his sleeve against his mouth and wept silently for a child who was not there, for help he could not give without dying. He pressed his face into the fabric of his jacket sleeve and breathed. In. Out. In. Out. The child's voice asked 3 more times. Then it stopped. Sometime after 2 a.m, the knocking stopped. The floorboards were still. The walls were still. He held his position and kept breathing into his sleeve, and did not trust the quiet, because the quiet had been a weapon more than once tonight, and he was not going to be undone by impatience at this stage. He waited until the dryness receded. The air lost its altitude thinness. The cold stopped falling in increments and became simply the ordinary cold of a late October night with no heat running. Weather, not presence. He waited until the clock on the wall started ticking again. He had not noticed it stop. He noticed immediately when it started, that slightly off rhythm back in its place, familiar and plain and enormously reassuring. He sat and listened to it for a long time before he let himself trust it. Then the refrigerator came on with its specific hum, the same key it always used, and he placed his palm flat on the kitchen floor and breathed for real. The first gray-blue light edged the kitchen window at dawn. He watched the room come back, furniture resolving from dark shapes, corners becoming corners again, the house reassembling itself from threat back into an ordinary place. A bird called once from the salt cedars, then another, further away. Then the south wind started up, low against the cedar leaves, that familiar papery rattle he had learned without trying over 9 days in this house. He stood. He put the kettle on. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He had not screamed. He had not spoken. He had not opened a door or answered a voice or picked up his keys after the moment he stopped himself. He picked up the laminated card from the kitchen table and read it once in the growing light. He was aware of something new, not a feeling he had a clean word for, but a reorientation. The kind that happens when the ground shifts under you and settles somewhere you did not choose and cannot leave. He had known for 2 weeks that the echo was real. He had operated inside that knowledge professionally. This was different. This was the knowledge that it had come for him, that it had cataloged his specific sound, his breath, his heartbeat, the exact frequencies of his fear, and spent an entire night spending that knowledge against him. It had not taken him, but it knew him now, the way only something that had stood outside in the dark and listened to him survive could know a person. He poured water over the coffee and held the mug with both hands and stood in his kitchen in the early morning. He thought about what it meant to be a shepherd in a town with a hunter. He thought he was beginning to understand what it actually cost. Miller called them in on the Friday morning after the siege. Jake drove to the station in flat exhaustion, the radio on and static running, the laminated card in his breast pocket. He had not been back at the Carver house after dark since Thursday night, and he was not yet certain when he would be. Some things you survived, and then you assessed the damage later, when the body had decided it was finished being vigilant. Kowalski was already in Miller's office, standing at the window with her arms crossed. She assessed Jake when he came in and looked away again without comment. Miller was at his desk. Before him sat a hand-drawn map, its paper yellowed at the folds, and a canvas bag with something heavy inside it. He waited until Jake sat down. "I need to say something I haven't said aloud in 30 years, he said. "The window is closing, so I'm saying it now." He told them about the mission. It had been built in 1847 by Franciscan priests who arrived to find something already living in the canyon system. Beneath the chapel floor, beneath the desert itself, was a natural shaft in the rock, 40 feet deep, terminating in a spherical chamber with acoustic properties unlike anything that occurred in nature. Sound that entered it did not dissipate. It circulated and amplified. The priests called it an ojo de sonido, an eye of sound. The echo had been drawn to it long before the mission was built. The well was its anchor, the source of its range and power, the reason it had stayed in this specific stretch of desert when there were quieter places to be. The priests forged 3 iron bells before they left, Miller continued. Specific low-frequency tones, struck in the correct harmonic sequence, disrupt the well's resonance cycle. Not permanently, but for approximately 30 years, the disruption limits the echo's power. The rules hold. The town is protected. He looked at the canvas bag. The last ringing was 1993. I was there as a junior officer. My father was chief. 30 years ago, Jake said. 31. The window is a 3-day period centered on the next moonless night. After that, the cycle completes, and the echo regains full strength for another 30 years. He looked at Jake. Thursday night was not coincidence. The well's power has been building for weeks. The echo came for you because you are the newest signature in its catalog, It was testing itself before the window, testing whether the rules could still hold. "When is the moonless night?" 4 days from tonight. Kowalski spoke from the window. "One bell is in the chapel. The other 2 were hidden in the desert after 1993. I know where they are." She said it with no elaboration, in the tone of someone reporting a confirmed fact. Jake looked at her. She had been approximately 20 years old in 1993, a young woman watching a chief ring iron bells in a crumbling chapel to reset the boundaries of something ancient. He understood now why she had transferred here voluntarily, and he did not ask about it. "We go tomorrow at first light," Miller said. "We need to be at the mission before dark on the 4th night." He pushed the canvas bag toward the center of the desk. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a small practice bell, its iron surface dark and pitted with age. "I'll walk you through the sequence tonight. Questions?" Jake had many. He asked the one that mattered. "Does it work?" Miller looked at him for a moment. "I'm 60 years old and I'm still here," he said. "Yes, it works." They went at dawn and found the first bell without difficulty, buried in a cairn at the base of a limestone formation Kowalski called the Rider, the canvas wrapping still intact, the bell inside cold and correct. The open flat between the first hiding site and the dry wash where the second bell lay was where the desert went silent. Not a gradual fade, a cut. Mid-step across the pale ground, the birds from the creosote stopped, the wind dropped, the world held its breath. Rule 2. Jake was already going down before the thought finished forming. Kowalski, flat in the dirt ahead of him, Miller a beat behind, all 3 pressing to the ground with their faces turned into their sleeves and the iron bells held still against their bodies. The ground was cold and hard. The sky above was enormous and indifferent. Jake breathed through his sleeve and counted. 22 minutes. A coyote called from the north and the birds resumed and the wind came back and they stood and walked. They found the second bell sealed in the dry wash bank, flat stone over oilskin wrapping, intact. Kowalski pulled it free and held it still before the clapper could shift. On the walk back, a voice came from the wash behind them. An old man's voice, thin and cracked, calling in something that was not Spanish and not English, older, rhythmic. Then it shifted. "Down here. There's water down here. Come see." Rule 3. Jake kept walking. Miller's pace did not change. Kowalski did not turn. The voice cycled through a child's register, then a woman's, with the urgency of something running low on time, and then the distance took it. They carried both bells back to the vehicles without speaking. On the 4th night they drove to the mission. Jake had passed the turnoff twice on patrol and never taken it. Kowalski's orientation notes read no solo approach, ever, and now he rode in the back seat with 2 iron bells wrapped in cloth against his thigh, driving toward the place the echo had called home for longer than the town had existed. The mission appeared in the headlights as a low, broken silhouette, stone walls largely standing, a collapsed bell tower at the northeast corner, the chapel intact beneath a roof that had given way in one section. The ground around it was bare, not drought bare, but absence bare, the kind that comes from nothing willing to grow in a place that had been this for this long. Miller killed the engine. The silence was immediate and total, not the absence of sound, but a presence. The well below the chapel floor, pulling the environmental noise inward, the way a drain pulls water. Jake had felt the echo's silence twice before. This was different. This was the silence at its source. "Earplugs at the threshold," Kowalski said quietly. "Not before. The bells have to be positioned first." She distributed foam plugs from her jacket pocket. "You'll know when." They crossed the bare ground with lights aimed at the dirt. Inside the chapel, the stone floor was swept almost clean, as if something moved through here regularly. The well was at the center, 2 feet across, perfectly circular, its edges worn smooth. Jake looked into it and saw not darkness, but absence, the same visual void as the echo's hollow eye sockets, mirrored in the ground. He held his light over the shaft, and the beam softened and scattered before it found any wall. The well absorbed it. Miller positioned the 3 bells on small iron stands in a triangle around the well, spacing them from the map's reverse side measurements. He adjusted each clapper with care, producing only dull taps. Even though small sounds moved strangely in the chapel, echoes multiplied by the well's geometry in ways that made them sound closer and older than they were. Jake was watching the doorway when it changed. The dark rectangle of night sky filled. A silhouette, too tall, too angular, proportions wrong in the specific way that 7 feet of height in a 6-foot doorway is wrong. Shoulders too wide, head too small relative to the body's length, limbs extended beyond normal range. It stood at the threshold and breathed, and the cold came across the floor, and the dryness and the silence deepened around all 3 of them. "Miller," Jake said quietly. "I see it." Miller adjusted the 3rd bell's stand position by a fraction without looking up. "Earplugs, now." Jake pressed the foam in. The world muffled. His heartbeat became very loud. He kept his eyes on the doorway. The vertical mouth opened. What came out was not loud. It was intimate, something that arrived not through the ears but in the chest and the base of the skull directly. It carried every voice the echo had ever collected and compressed them into a single frequency of human agony, grief, terror, and the specific desolation of dying alone in a silent place with your mouth open and no sound coming. Jake felt the paralysis begin in his hands and move inward, the body's response to a sound that encoded the end of everything. He found the wall behind him with his back, pressed against it, breathed into his sleeve, held. Kowalski struck the 1st bell. The low tone filled the chapel and struck the well's shaft like a stone dropped into still water. Jake felt the frequency through the floor, through his boots, in his back teeth. Miller struck the 2nd, a lower tone, discordant with the 1st, the 2 colliding in the well and producing a subsonic pressure that Jake felt in his sternum. The figure in the doorway took 1 step back. Its head tilted with the quality of something that has never been forced to listen before and does not know what to do with the experience. Jake struck the 3rd bell. A full, committed swing. The highest tone rose and met the other 2 above the well, and the combination produced not a chord, but a disruption, a dissonance that fractured the well's resonance loop at its source. The ground moved, a deep rolling vibration from far below, stone shifting under stone. Dust fell from the ceiling. The well exhaled, a cold rush up the shaft carrying the accumulated silence of 30 years expelling itself all at once. The figure made a sound that had never been human, a frequency of pure negation, ancient, enraged, from the open vertical mouth, and inside the mouth there was nothing. No tongue, no throat, the same darkness as the hollow eye sockets, the whole face a map of voids organized into something that had forgotten what it was. They struck the bells again, all 3, in sequence, and again. The dissonance deepened and the acoustic pull inverted, the air in the chapel moving from the doorway toward the well with directional force, a current running the wrong way, the drain drawing from the threshold rather than the room. The figure pressed against the doorframe, long fingers splaying against the stone. Kowalski struck her bell a final time. Miller his. Jake his. The figure released the frame. It did not fall. It compressed, the distance between the doorway and the well collapsing around the shaft's axis. And then the doorway was empty, and the chapel's acoustic quality changed in a single instant from the dread density of the well at full resonance to the ordinary stillness of an old stone room. The north wall gave way, stones descending into the desert with a slow, deliberate sound. Part of the ceiling followed. They moved, Miller gathering the bells, Kowalski already at the door, Jake through the entrance into the cold night air with the iron rod still in his hand. They stood in the bare earth clearing and caught their breath. Miller set the bells down carefully. He looked at the chapel facade for a long moment. The cracked stone, the collapsed tower, the structure standing but diminished, with the expression of a man saying goodbye to an obligation rather than a place. 30 years, Kowalski said. Give or take, he said. They drove back on the dirt road with the desert resuming its ordinary voice around them. The radio static ran low and steady. By the time they reached the highway, the sky to the east had begun to lighten, the first gray-blue edge rising over the rock formations. Miller pulled into the station lot as the sun broke the horizon. Jake stood beside the cruiser and looked at Sorrow Springs in the early morning, the diner across the road with its lights already on, the two-lane highway, the desert stretching out beyond the last building in every direction, vast and pale. It looked exactly like the place he had flown into 3 weeks ago in a dusty Cessna, with a laminated card he hadn't yet read. It was different now. He understood what it was and what it needed, and what it cost to give it that. A black cat rounded the corner of the station building and crossed the parking lot at a diagonal, unhurried, with the self-possession of an animal that has made up its mind about a piece of territory. It stopped once, leveled yellow eyes at them both, and continued toward the diner without further comment. Kowalski watched it go. Jake looked at her, the leathery tan, the horizon-searching eyes, the weight of a night they would both carry forward, and felt something in the approximate neighborhood of the bond that forms between two people who have held the same line against the same thing and are still standing on the same side of it. Guess we better feed it, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. Once. They went inside. The cabin looked exactly like the photos online, which was the first pleasant surprise of the weekend. Rustic log construction, a wide porch, smoke already curling from the stone chimney. Though I realized later that didn't make sense, since no one had been up here in weeks. The key was under the mat, just like the rental app said. I was already imagining myself in front of the fire with a beer and a book when I saw the paper pinned to the door. Laminated. Official looking. Rules, it said at the top in bold letters. I laughed. People really do love their liability waivers up here. I should explain how I got there first. I left Boston at 6 in the morning on a Friday, which already told you how badly I needed this trip. I'm not a morning person. I'm a graphic designer who works from a studio apartment in Allston, and my idea of nature is the small park 2 blocks from my building where I eat lunch sometimes. I had a camping lantern from a pharmacy, a 6-pack of IPA, 3 days of groceries from Whole Foods, and a paperback I'd been meaning to read since February. That was my survival kit. The breakup had been 3 weeks earlier. Her name was Dana, and we'd been together for 2 years, and she'd sat across from me at our kitchen table with the kind of calm expression that meant she'd been rehearsing. She said something about growing in different directions. I didn't fight it. That was the part that surprised me most. How little fight I had left. I just nodded, helped her move boxes to her car the following Saturday, and then sat on the couch for 4 hours, staring at the wall. 3 weeks later, I found a listing on a rental app. Remote mountain retreat, perfect for solitude seekers. The reviews were good, 4.8 stars. People said things like truly disconnected and exactly what I needed. Nobody mentioned the rules. Nobody mentioned anything unusual at all. About 12 miles before the cabin, I passed a ranger station. Small wooden building, blinds down, parking area empty. There was a laminated note taped to the front door. Back in the morning. If you're heading to Bald Mountain Cabin, read the rules before nightfall. Below that, in blue ballpoint pen, this is not a joke. I took a photo of it, got back in the car, and kept driving. The last stretch was where the isolation really settled in. The paved highway had ended 20 miles back. After that, gravel. Then packed dirt. Then something barely a path, winding up through birch and pine that closed overhead like a tunnel. My GPS had given up around mile 15, showing a gray screen with a blinking dot representing me, surrounded by nothing. No roads, no towns, just topographic lines and silence. I rolled the window down. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of pine resin and something faintly mineral underneath, wet stone, maybe. The forest was still, not quiet the way parks are quiet. Actually still. No birds, no wind, no rustling. The trees just stood there like they were waiting. I told myself that was exactly what I'd come for. The cabin appeared at the end of a short clearing, and I pulled in and sat in the car a moment looking at it. Solid, well kept. The logs dark with age, but sealed. The roof pitched steeply enough to shed snow. A cord of firewood was stacked along the side wall under a tarp. The chimney was stone, cold and dark. No smoke, despite what I thought I'd seen from the road. I got out, grabbed my bags, and went to the door. The laminated sheet was pinned to it at eye level, centered, with 4 thumbtacks at the corners. Whoever had put it there wanted it seen. Rules for guests. Bald Mountain Cabin. 6 items, single-spaced, typed plain. Signed at the bottom. Ranger Bill Taggart, Maine Forest Service. I read it the way you read the safety card on an airplane. 1. Keep the fire burning until dawn. Don't let it go out. 2. Don't look at the bathroom mirror after 10 p.m. 3. If you hear your name called from the woods, don't answer. It's not a person. 4. Don't eat whatever meat is in the freezer, even if you're starving. 5. If you hear singing from the chimney, throw salt in the fire. 6. If you survive until dawn, leave immediately. Don't stay a second night. I stood on the porch and read it a second time. Then I looked at the tree line. Then I looked at the rules again. Then I laughed, genuinely, out loud. Because what else do you do? This was theater. Some ranger with a laminator and a sense of humor wanted to give city tourists a good story to bring home. When to go. The word was right there in the document, spelled out plain. I knew when to go's the way you know things from horror movies. Algonquian legend, cannibalism folklore, the monster of the week shorthand. Nothing to take seriously, just a story. I unpinned the sheet, carried it inside, and set it on the kitchen table. The cabin was exactly what you wanted after a long drive. 1 main room with the wood stove at the center, a couch and armchair, a small wooden table, a kitchen alcove with a propane burner and a hand pump for water, a chest freezer in the corner with a brass padlock that was, I noticed, currently unlocked. A short hallway led to a bedroom and bathroom. The floors were wide plank pine worn smooth by years of feet. The shelving held paperbacks, some board games, and glass jars. One of matches, one holding something white I first assumed was sugar. When I leaned in, the smell told me it was salt. A large box of it sat on the mantelpiece above the wood stove like it had always lived there. The wood pile was what surprised me most. Inside the cabin, stacked floor to ceiling in the corner beside the stove, was more cut wood than I'd ever seen indoors. Clean, split birch and maple, reaching my chin. I thought, whoever keeps this place really doesn't want anyone running out of firewood. That struck me as thoughtful at the time. Later, it struck me differently. I put my groceries away. I cracked a beer. I walked past the chest freezer and caught a smell. cold and faintly sweet, like meat kept just below the threshold of going bad. I made a mental note to stay out of it, not because of any rule, just because the smell was off. Building the fire took 3 attempts, because I hadn't built one since summer camp at 12. The first produced smoke and no flame. The second produced a flame that died. The third, using instructions taped inside the stove lid. Someone had actually taped instructions inside the stove lid, caught and held, and within 20 minutes the cabin was warm and smelling of birch smoke. I had a beer open and the paperback out, and the rules were sitting face up on the table across the room. I thought about texting my friend Marcus. He would have found the rules hilarious. I got my phone out. No service, not even one bar. I typed a message anyway. Staying in a cabin with official Wendigo rules. This is either very stupid or very funny. It sat in my outbox, going nowhere. I put the phone down and watched the fire. The dark came down fast out here. 1 minute the forest was gray and readable, the tree line a clear edge against dim sky. The next minute it was black, not dark, black. The windows became mirrors, reflecting the room back at me. I looked at Rule 2 again. Do not look at the bathroom mirror after 10 p.m. I figured the window mirrors didn't count. I ate dinner around 7:30, pasta I'd brought from home. For about 45 minutes, I almost relaxed. I thought about Dana once, briefly, not with sadness exactly, more with that dull ache for something that used to be there and isn't anymore. Then I stopped thinking about her and read my book. At 9, I heard it. I want to be precise about this because I spent the next few minutes trying hard to explain it away. It started as something vague, a sound in the trees to the north, indistinct enough that it might have been wind or an animal. But it sharpened. It became a voice, and the voice was calling my name. Leo, Leo, help me. I'm lost. I set my book down. The voice was Dana's, not similar, not in the general category. It was her voice, the exact pitch and texture, the way she said my name with the E slightly long, the way she sounded when something was wrong and she was trying not to panic. 2 years of that voice. I knew every shade of it. Leo, please, I'm cold. I was halfway to the door before Rule 3 surfaced in my mind, rising like something from deep water. If you hear a voice calling your name from the woods, do not answer. It is not a person. I stopped with my hand 3 inches from the door handle. The voice called again. Closer now. Leo, I can see the cabin light. I just need help. That was the worst part. The progression. It had started vague and distant, and now it was urgent and specific, the kind of voice that bypasses thinking and goes straight to the part of you that just moves. I felt the pull of it, strong, real. The reflex to open a door for someone who needs help is deep and almost impossible to override. I took my hand off the door handle. I went back to the couch. I picked up the rules sheet and read Rule 3 again, word by word. If the voice sounds like someone you love, do not answer. That line was sitting there in plain typed text, like Ranger Taggart had known exactly what kind of voice the thing out there would use, like he'd known it would be specific, personal, something that worked on you. I sat still, and I did not answer. The voice called twice more over the next 5 minutes, each time from a different angle, north side, then east. Moving, circling, testing the perimeter the way you'd test a locked door, trying each side. Patient, methodical, not screaming, not desperate, just that steady, familiar voice, almost conversational. Then silence. The silence was worse than the voice. With the voice, I'd known where it was. With silence, I knew nothing. I sat with the fire ticking in the stove and the propane lantern hissing softly and the windows black around me, and I tried to think. There was a rational explanation. Sound travels strangely in cold mountain air. Maybe someone's car had broken down on the road. Maybe a woman was actually lost. But the rational explanation required believing that a lost stranger had somehow known my name. And it didn't account for the way the voice had moved, the way it had come from multiple directions, the way it had been her voice, not a voice. Her voice. I looked at the rules. I wasn't smiling. I added 2 logs to the fire. I checked the time on the mantelpiece clock. 9:47 p.m. The mirror rule started at 10. The bathroom was 10 feet down the hallway. I had 13 minutes, and I was not going anywhere near that hallway. Not at 9:47, not at 10, not tonight. I had no reason to be in that bathroom, and I was going to sit right here and maintain that record. I pulled the armchair close to the stove and sat facing the fire. The flames moved behind the glass door, orange and solid, casting heat I could feel on my face. The clock on the mantelpiece passed 10 without ceremony. I didn't move. I sat there for another hour, and 2 hours after that, feeding the fire. The rules were on the table behind me, face up, and somewhere in those 2 hours I'd memorized all 6 of them without meaning to. Whatever had been out there was quiet now, but quiet wasn't the same as gone. That was the first thing I understood since arriving. Really understood, not just read. The voice had been real. The rules had known about the voice. They'd described it exactly. The luring, the mimicry, the name. That meant someone had written these rules because the things in them had actually happened. To someone. Probably more than one someone. Which meant the rest of the rules were real too. I stared into the fire and kept feeding it and did not let it go out. The waiting was the worst part. I'd survived the voice. I'd added wood to the fire. I'd pulled the armchair close to the stove and sat with my back straight and my hands on my knees, and I'd told myself that was it. The thing had tested me. I'd passed, and now it would leave me alone until morning. That was what I told myself. The cabin had other ideas. Around 11, the wind came up. Not the ordinary kind that moves through trees and fades. This was a steady, pressing thing from the north that leaned against the walls like it had actual weight. The logs creaked. The window frames rattled in their casings. The propane lantern on the kitchen table swayed slightly, though I couldn't feel any draft where I was sitting. I watched it swing and told myself it was just the house settling, just the temperature dropping, just normal mountain weather on a cold October night. The fire was good. I kept it good. Every 20 minutes I'd open the stove door and check, and if the logs had burned down, I'd put another one on from the pile in the corner. The pile was still tall, still plenty. I had that going for me. What I didn't have was any real reason to feel safe. I tried to read. I got through half a page before I realized I hadn't absorbed a single sentence and gave up. I tried to think about work. I had a logo project due the following Wednesday, a small brewery in Cambridge that wanted something woodsy and rustic, and the irony of that was not lost on me. But thinking about the job felt so distant and irrelevant that it almost made me laugh. I tried to think about anything except what had happened at 9 o'clock. Dana's voice, coming out of the trees, the way it had moved between directions, the way it had known my name. The clock read 10:40. I shifted in the armchair and stared at the fire and tried to think of a rational explanation for the voice, the same way you try to explain a noise in the night before you admit you're scared. I went through the list. Sound carries strangely in cold air. Someone was on the road. A woman was actually lost. Every option required the voice to have known my name by coincidence. I dropped the rational explanations at around 10:50 and didn't pick them up again. At 10:15, I should have mentioned this earlier, this is where things got worse. At 10:15, I needed to use the bathroom. It started as a minor inconvenience, an annoyance, the kind you notice and set aside and think, in a minute. I shifted in the armchair. I crossed my legs. I looked at the hallway. 10 feet of wooden floor, the bedroom door on the left, the bathroom door on the right, both closed. The bathroom door had no lock on the outside. I knew that because I'd checked it earlier, before 10, when I was still pretending the rules were a joke. The mirror was in there. Rule 2. Do not look at the bathroom mirror after 10 p.m. The Wendigo uses reflections to reach across. The clock on the mantelpiece read 10:15. I thought carefully about what the rule actually said. Do not look at the mirror. Not don't go in the bathroom. Don't look at the mirror. I was a graphic designer. I was precise about language for a living. Those were two different instructions. You could go in the bathroom without looking at the mirror, keep your eyes down, handle your business, wash your hands looking at the faucet, walk back out. 30 seconds, eyes on the floor the entire time. I told myself that for about 10 minutes. Then I got up. The hallway was colder than the main room. The fire's warmth stopped right at the entrance, and I felt the temperature drop on my face as I stepped in. I moved quickly to the bathroom door, pushed it open without turning on the light. The propane lantern in the main room threw a thin wedge of yellow through the open doorway. Enough. I left the door open wide. I kept my eyes on the floor. The tile was old linoleum, white with a small gray pattern, worn through to the subfloor near the toilet. I looked at my socks. I looked at the bottom of the sink when I stepped up to it. I turned the cold tap, no hot water, just hand pump pressure, and the water came out icy, and I washed my hands fast, eyes on the water, eyes on the drain, eyes on anything except the rectangular shape in my peripheral vision that I was absolutely, deliberately not looking at. I was almost done. 10 seconds from being back in the hallway. My eyes moved. I can't fully explain it. Some reflexive, stupid part of me needed to confirm nothing was wrong. My eyes came up from the faucet and found the mirror before I'd made any conscious decision to look, and for a fraction of a second I saw my own reflection, and everything looked completely normal, and I started to look away. I looked back. My reflection hadn't moved. My body had already started the turn. Shoulders rotating, weight shifting to my left foot. But in the mirror, my reflection was still facing forward, looking at the spot where I'd been half a second ago. Its eyes were fixed on empty air. I froze. The reflection stood there. It didn't blink. It didn't adjust. It held that position. My face, my clothes, my hair, every detail exactly right. Looking at nothing. It was like watching a photograph of myself, except the photograph was three-dimensional and standing in a mirror and simply not doing what I was doing. Then it turned its head, slowly, the way you'd turn to look at something you'd just heard, smooth and deliberate. It turned until it was looking directly at me, and then it smiled. Not my smile. The mouth stretched too wide, corners pulling back further than a human mouth should go, showing teeth. Too many of them. The eyes didn't change at all. They just watched, flat and patient, while the mouth did that awful thing. The rule was in my head before I'd consciously recalled it. Walk backward out of the room. Do not run. Walk backward and keep your eyes on the mirror. I walked backward. One step, then another, keeping my eyes fixed on the mirror, on that face wearing my face, on those teeth. My left hand found the door frame behind me, and I used it to guide the angle without turning. The reflection didn't follow. It stood there smiling, watching me go. I was nearly through the doorway when it raised its hand. Not to wave. It brought the right hand up slowly and pressed the palm flat against the glass from the other side, fingers spread wide like it was checking whether the surface was solid, like it was feeling for a weakness. The fingertips pressed white against the mirror, and I could see they were wrong. Too long, the nails dark, the joints at unnatural angles. I pulled the bathroom door shut. My hand grabbed the edge and yanked it closed, and I stood in the hallway with my back against the opposite wall, breathing in short, sharp pulls. There was no lock on the outside of the bathroom door. Nothing to stop whatever was in that mirror from coming through if it could. The rule said the Wendigo uses reflections to reach across. I still didn't understand the mechanics of that. I wasn't sure I wanted to. I went to the bedroom and hooked the latch and sat on the edge of the narrow bed and held my own hands to stop them shaking. The bedroom was small. Single bed, wooden chair, north-facing window. I didn't look at the window. I kept my eyes on the floor. From the bathroom, after about 30 seconds of silence, I heard it. Fingernails on glass, slow and dragging. Not frantic, not desperate, patient. Something with hard nails tracing lines on the mirror surface, back and forth, lifting and starting again at the top. It had a rhythm to it, almost like someone idly tapping a table. like it had nowhere else to be and was perfectly content to wait out the night. I sat on the bed and listened, and then a different thought arrived, and it was worse than the scratching. The fire. I was in the bedroom. The fire was in the main room. I had left it unattended. Maybe 15 minutes by now, maybe more. Rule 1. Keep the fire burning until dawn. The fire is the only thing that keeps it from entering through the walls. If it dies, you have until the first ray of sunlight to survive. You probably won't. I had to go back out. I unhooked the latch, opened the door, looked down the hallway. Bathroom door still closed. The warm yellow light from the main room still fell across the floor. I walked fast, 4 steps, came out into the main room and went straight to the wood pile and grabbed 2 logs and opened the stove and put them on. The fire caught the new wood, and the flames came up full and hot, and the warmth spread back across my hands and face. I straightened up and looked at the bathroom door. Still closed. Quiet. Nothing moved in the gap at the bottom. I went back to the armchair and sat down and did not take my eyes off that door. The scratching started again about 10 minutes later. Slower this time, or maybe just muffled by the distance and the door. It went in long, deliberate strokes, like something dragging a fingernail from top to bottom of the mirror and then lifting and starting over. It went on for 20 minutes, then stopped, then started again. There was a rhythm to it. Patient, almost thoughtful. I sat by the fire and listened and added wood when the fire needed it and did not sleep. The wind dropped around 2 in the morning. Not gradually, just stopping, the way sounds stop in dreams. And after that, the cabin was quiet except for the stove ticking. The scratching from the bathroom stopped around the same time. The silence that came after was its own kind of pressure. I paced the main room when my eyes got heavy. I drank cold water from the hand pump. I checked the rules sheet on the kitchen table every 20 minutes or so. I didn't eat. I wasn't hungry. The fear had handled that. The first gray light came through the east window just after 5. I watched it arrive. Black first, then dark gray, then the pale, flat light of a clouded dawn. The trees came back. Birch trunks, pine branches, the rocky face of the mountain above the cabin. The world outside reassembled itself into something ordinary, something recognizable. I sat in the armchair and felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight since 9 o'clock the night before. I waited 20 more minutes until the daylight was solid and clear. Then I got up. I stood in front of the bathroom door for a long moment. The scratching had been gone for hours. The cabin was quiet. I reached out, put my hand on the handle, and pushed it open. Just a bathroom. Old linoleum, dripping tap, bare wood walls, nothing on the floor. The mirror caught the morning light and showed me myself, unshaved, red-eyed, looking like I'd aged 5 years since the previous morning. My reflection moved when I moved, blinked when I blinked, behaved exactly the way a reflection was supposed to behave. I let out a long, slow breath. I stepped up to the sink to wash my face, and that was when I saw it. The lower right corner of the mirror was fogged, a smear of cold condensation that hadn't been there before. The kind that forms when something breathes close to glass, and written through it, in letters maybe an inch tall, drawn by the tip of something narrow and deliberate. Hungry. I stood there and read it twice. Then I went back to the main room, added 2 logs to the fire, and sat down in the armchair and looked at the rules sheet and started thinking about how I was going to get out of here. It was just after 5:30. I had survived the first night. Something had spent the dark hours pressing its hand against a mirror 10 feet away, and when the light came, it had left me a message, and the message was 1 word. I was starting to understand that 1 word explained everything. I packed my bags at 6 in the morning. Not carefully. I just grabbed things and pushed them into my duffel, stuffing clothes in without folding them, not caring about any of it. The groceries I'd brought were mostly gone. The beer was gone. The book was on the floor where I'd dropped it the night before, and I left it there. I took the rules sheet off the kitchen table and looked at it 1 more time, then set it back down. I thought about taking it with me and decided I wanted nothing from this place. I wanted to drive away and never think about Bald Mountain or Ranger Bill Taggart or any of it again. The fire had been burning all night. I left it. It could burn itself out. I grabbed my duffel, locked the cabin door out of pure habit, which was almost funny, given everything, and walked to my car. The morning was gray and cold, the sky low and flat, the trees standing perfectly still in the windless air. Everything looked ordinary. That was the strange thing. After the night I'd just had, the world outside looked completely normal, just a cold mountain morning, and I stood next to my car for a moment, not quite trusting it. I got in, started the engine, pulled down the short clearing and onto the dirt road. The road was fine for the first mile, narrow and rutted, same as the day I'd arrived, the birch trees closing in on either side. I kept the speed low because the surface was uneven, and I didn't trust my sedan on anything rough. Around the 2-mile mark, I knew it was roughly 2 miles because of the drive-in. The road changed. Not blocked, not flooded, not fallen trees or a washed-out section. Just gone. I came around a slight curve and the dirt track simply ended. Where the road should have continued, there was forest. Dense, close-packed spruce with no gap between the trunks, no path through, no indication that a road had ever existed there. The trees looked old. Not recently moved, not recently grown, just there, solid and permanent, as if the road I'd driven in on 2 days ago had never happened. I stopped the car and stared through the windshield for a long time. I got out and walked to the tree line. I put my hand on one of the spruce trunks, solid, real bark, rough under my palm, lichen growing on the north side. I walked along the edge in both directions for about 30 feet, looking for any gap, any break, any sign that the road continued somewhere. There was nothing. The forest was seamless. I got back in the car. I turned around. I drove back the way I'd come, slowly, watching the road. A 1/4 mile back toward the cabin, the road ended behind me too. The same thing. Forest where the road had been, old spruce standing close together as if they'd always been there. I sat in the car with the engine running and my hands on the wheel, and I didn't move for a while. I thought about Ranger Taggart's note. Back in the morning. Maybe he'd come up and see the cabin occupied. Maybe he'd check on it. I sat with that thought for about 2 minutes before I understood that Taggart had written the rules, which meant he probably knew exactly what could happen to the road up here. And he'd still left a note saying back in the morning instead of staying to help. That told me something about my odds of rescue that I didn't want to think about too hard. I drove back to the cabin. The fire had gone out while I was gone. The stove was cold when I touched it, the cabin already losing its heat. My breath fogged in the air inside. I stood in the main room looking at the dead stove and felt something that wasn't quite panic but was close. A tightening in the chest, a flatness in the thinking. I rebuilt the fire. It took 4 attempts this time because my hands were shaking and I kept dropping the matches. On the 4th try, the kindling caught and I held my breath and watched it spread to the smaller logs and then to the larger ones. The heat came back slowly. I sat in the armchair and looked at the rules sheet and read Rule 6 again. If you survive until dawn, you must leave immediately. Do not stay a second night. The Wendigo learns. It adapts. The first night is a test. The second night is a siege. The third night, you belong to the mountain. The second night is a siege. I read that 3 times and then put the sheet face down on the table because I didn't want to look at it anymore. The day passed slowly. I had almost nothing to eat, half a protein bar from the side pocket of my duffel, left over from the drive up, which I ate in small pieces over the afternoon to make it last. I drank water from the hand pump. I watched the light outside move from gray morning to grayer afternoon. I didn't look at the chest freezer in the kitchen corner. I kept my eyes away from it deliberately, the same way I'd kept my eyes off the bathroom mirror the night before. Don't look at the thing, and it's easier not to think about it. I thought about it constantly. By 4 in the afternoon, the light was already fading. By 5, it was full dark, the trees invisible beyond the window glass, the cabin reduced to its own small circle of firelight. I'd added wood twice since rebuilding the fire, and the pile was lower than I wanted. Still enough, probably, but lower than I liked. The hunger arrived the way cold does when you've been ignoring it too long. All at once, suddenly impossible to set aside. I hadn't eaten a real meal since Friday dinner, nearly 48 hours. My stomach had stopped growling around noon and gone quiet in a way that felt worse than growling. A dull, empty pressure sitting below my ribs, making it hard to concentrate on anything else. I looked at the freezer. I told myself I was just going to stand near it, just confirm what was in there so I'd know exactly what I was refusing. I got up and walked to the kitchen corner and put my hand on the lid. The rule said, do not eat any meat found in the freezer, even if you are starving, even if it looks like normal venison. It is not human, but it was once. Eating it will make you belong to the mountain. You will begin to change. There is no cure. I opened the lid. The cold air that came out smelled like the smell I'd caught on Friday. That faintly sweet, slightly wrong smell, stronger now with the lid fully open. Inside, maybe a dozen packages in white butcher paper, labeled in black marker. Most said venison. One near the back had no label at all. One said Winter, 1987 in smaller writing. The ink faded, the paper yellowed at the edges. 38 years in a freezer. I picked up one of the venison packages, dense and cold through my palms. It looked like normal frozen deer meat, the flat rectangular bulk of something cut and wrapped properly. I held it and thought about how easy it would be to just cook it on the propane burner and eat it and feel better and be stronger for the night ahead. It smelled fine. It looked fine. Then I felt it. Under my palms, a faint rhythmic pressure, barely there, like something at the very edge of sensation. The suggestion of a pulse, not my heartbeat, not vibration from my hands, something in the package itself, slow and regular. Like something sleeping. I dropped it back into the freezer and shut the lid hard and stepped away from it. I stood in the kitchen with my hands at my sides and tried to breathe normally. The pulse, if that's what it was, if I hadn't imagined it, had lasted maybe 3 seconds, long enough to feel real, long enough to be certain I was not opening that freezer again. I went back to the armchair. I fed the fire. I waited. Night settled fully around 7. By 8, the temperature outside had dropped enough that I could feel it in the drafts coming through the window frames, cold threads of air that the fire couldn't quite reach. I pulled my jacket on and moved the armchair a little closer to the stove. It started at 9:30. Not the voice, singing. It came from the chimney, not from outside it, from inside, from somewhere in the flue, rising with the heat. A woman's voice, clear and unhurried, singing something slow. I recognized the melody before I could name it. A soft, swaying thing. The kind of tune that lives in the back of your memory without a label attached. Beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful when they make you feel something you can't quite name. My eyes were heavy within 30 seconds. Not tired heavy. A different kind of heavy, like something pressing down from outside. Like the weight of the sound itself was physical, settling over me. Rule 5. I didn't finish the thought. I was already on my feet, reaching for the salt box on the mantelpiece. I grabbed a fistful and threw it into the stove through the open door. The fire hissed. The flames went green. A flat, chemical green, vivid and wrong, nothing like any fire I'd ever seen. And in the same moment, the singing stopped, not faded, stopped like a radio cutting out. 1 second it was there, the next there was only the hiss of the fire returning to orange and the silence of the cabin pressing in. I stood in front of the stove with the salt box in my hand and my heart hammering. That had been close. Whatever threshold the singing needed to reach, I'd been almost there in under a minute. If I'd been sitting with my eyes already half closed from exhaustion, I might not have moved in time. The rule said, if you sleep while it sings, you will dream of the cold. You will walk outside in your sleep. You will not wake up. I put the salt box on the armrest where I could reach it without getting up. The scratching started around 10. It began at the north wall and moved, slowly, methodically, around the west side, a rhythmic scraping against the exterior logs that paused at each window before continuing. I could track it by sound, following it around the cabin. It made a full circuit, then started a second, then a third, circling over and over, slow and patient, like something learning the dimensions of the building. Learning where the walls were thinnest, where the windows sat, where the door was. After the fourth circuit, it stopped moving and settled against the door. The quality of the scratching changed. Less exploratory, more deliberate. Less like something searching, and more like something that had decided. The door was solid wood with a bolt, and I watched the bolt from the armchair. It didn't move. The sound at the door went on for a long time. I fed the fire. I held the salt box. I watched the door. I did not sleep. The light came just after 5. I was still in the armchair, still awake, the fire still burning. I got up and counted the remaining wood. Stacked carefully, it would last one more night. Barely. I stood there looking at what was left and thought about Rule 6. If you survive until dawn, you must leave immediately. The road was still gone. I'd checked twice during the day. Both times the forest stood where the road should have been, solid and indifferent. I had no way out. One night's worth of wood, barely, no food. A freezer full of meat I couldn't touch, and a mirror I couldn't look at, and a chimney I had to watch, and a door that something had spent half the night pressing against. The third night, you belong to the mountain. I put the rules sheet back down and sat in the armchair in the gray morning light, and tried very hard not to think about what belonging to the mountain meant. The third day was the hardest, not because of anything dramatic happening in daylight. Nothing came through the walls while the sun was up. No voice called from the trees. The day was just gray and cold and empty, and I was running out of everything that mattered. No food. The half-protein bar had been gone since yesterday afternoon. I drank water from the hand pump, which helped with the worst of it, but didn't touch the hollow ache sitting below my ribs. I hadn't slept in 2 nights. Not real sleep. Not more than the occasional 10-minute drop that jerked me back awake with my heart going. My eyes felt gritty and wrong, and I kept losing track of things. What I'd just been thinking. Whether I'd added wood recently or only meant to. The wood pile was what I kept coming back to. I counted it 3 times through the morning. 8 split logs and some smaller pieces. If I kept the fire at a steady low burn rather than building it up, maybe 5 or 6 hours of heat into the night. After that, I'd be burning furniture. I looked at the wooden chairs at the table and thought, if it comes to it. I looked at the shelving with the board games and thought, those too. I searched the cabin because I needed something to do with my hands and because there were still corners I hadn't checked properly. I hadn't opened the closet at the back of the bedroom, the narrow one with the wooden latch. I told myself there was nothing useful in there. I opened it anyway. A wool blanket, musty but intact. I took that immediately and pulled it around my shoulders. A pair of rubber boots too big for me, a rusted handsaw with a cracked handle, and on the floor of the closet, pushed back into the corner behind the boots, a journal. Old, dark leather cover, worn soft at the edges, no name on the outside. I carried it to the armchair and opened it under the propane lantern. Most of the entries were practical. Dates, weather, trap records, animals. Terse and plain. The entries ran from early winter through late January and then stopped. The last entry was different. The handwriting was loose and slightly shaky, written by someone whose hands weren't steady. It said, "It sang again last night." I answered. I thought it was my wife. The voice was hers exactly, and I opened the door before I remembered. It wasn't my wife. I am writing this to warn whoever comes next. Do not answer the voice. Do not open the door. Burn this journal when you find it. It wants me to write. It is guiding my hand. It wants me to tell you to come outside and see. Don't come outside. Whatever you read here, don't come. I closed the journal and put it in the stove. The fire took the old leather and paper with a sound like a long exhale, and for a few seconds the flames went higher than they had all day, burning hot and bright at the center. Then they settled back down. I stood in front of the stove and thought about the man who'd written those words, the trapper who'd built this cabin in the 1930s, who'd survived here alone through a deep winter, who'd heard the singing and thought it was his wife and opened the door, who had never been seen again, whose cabin had been maintained for 90 years by a ranger who left laminated rule sheets for strangers. I thought about him for a minute. Then I stopped because it wasn't helping anything. The afternoon passed slow and gray. The light faded early, same as every day up here in late October, the sky dimming by 4 and going fully dark by 5. I added a log, set the salt box on the armrest, pulled the blanket tighter. I read the rules one more time, all 6, front to back. Then I left the sheet face up on the table. I wanted to be able to see it without reaching for it. When the dark was full, the Wendigo didn't ease in the way it had the previous nights. The scratching hit the door immediately, hard and deliberate, like it had spent the whole day deciding where to start. Then the voice came from the north side. Not Dana this time. A man's voice I didn't recognize at all, which was almost worse, because there was no specific person to feel grief for. Just my name, again and again, patient and close. Then around 9, the singing began from the chimney. I threw salt before it lasted 10 seconds. Fire went green. Singing cut off. I stayed on my feet after that because the chair made it too easy to let my guard down. The scratching at the door went on. The voice cycled. The man, then a woman, then something that sounded almost like a child but slightly off in pitch. I kept my hand on the salt box and fed the fire when it dipped and watched the woodpile go down. 10 o'clock, 6 logs left. 11, 4, midnight, 2 logs and the smaller pieces. I sat in front of the stove with 2 logs left and I did the math and the math was bad. Maybe an hour of wood. Dawn was 4 hours away. The cold was pressing in through the window frames already, threading along the floor. My breath was faintly visible in the cabin air. That was when the singing changed. Same source. The chimney, the upward drift of sound rising with the heat. But the voice was different. Not the anonymous woman from the previous night. Not beautiful and distant. This was my mother's voice. She died 5 years ago. The last thing she did with any real intention was hum something to herself in the hospital bed while I sat next to her, a melody from when I was very small. I hadn't been able to name it in the years since. I couldn't name it now. But I knew it the same way you know something in a dream, completely and without being able to explain why. It came down through the chimney in her exact voice. I reached for the salt box. My hand didn't move. I don't know how to explain that. I was telling my arm to go, and nothing was happening. My eyes were filling, which I hadn't anticipated, and the fire was going down, and the voice kept going around the melody, and the weight of it was the specific, heavy gravity of something you have lost and cannot get back, different from anything the previous 2 nights had done to me. I covered my ears with both hands and pressed hard. The singing came through anyway, as clear as if it were in the room with me, not up in the chimney at all. I was crying. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. 3 days alone up there with no food and no sleep, and then my dead mother's voice, patient and exact, singing the melody from the hospital room. I sat on the floor in front of a dying fire and cried. That's what happened, and I'm just telling it. The fire dropped to coals while my hands were over my ears. I saw it happen through blurred eyes. The last log going gray, the flames sinking down, the orange glow shrinking to the coal bed. The cold came in properly then, the ambient temperature of the cabin dropping by several degrees in what felt like minutes. The cold that had been waiting outside pressing through the walls now that there wasn't enough fire to push back. 1 piece of wood left, a split chunk about the size of my forearm. I put it on the coals. 20 minutes, maybe 25. I looked at the freezer. The singing hadn't stopped. My mother's voice, unhurried, going around the same melody. 3 nights in, and it had found the exact thing I couldn't hold against. The fire was nearly gone, and dawn was still 3 hours away, and I hadn't eaten in 3 days. and I was on the floor of a cabin in northern Maine holding my ears against a dead woman's voice, and I was so tired. I got up and walked to the freezer. I want to be honest about what I was thinking. I was thinking, fire is almost out. I have no wood. Dawn is hours away. I need to stay functional. I was doing survival arithmetic and not rules arithmetic. I was telling myself that eating would give me enough to last until light. I was telling myself a lot of things. I opened the freezer. I took out the unlabeled package, the small, irregular one, and unwrapped it on the kitchen counter. Inside, meat that looked like venison. Dark red, densely grained, cut cleanly. It smelled like venison. I found a pan under the burner, put it on the gas, cooked the meat. It browned the way meat browns. It smelled normal the whole time. I took a bite. The cold hit me from the inside. Not temperature cold, something else. A cold that moved through my chest from the center outward, spreading slow and certain, like something taking up space that hadn't been empty before. I set the pan down and looked at my hands on the counter. They were pale, paler than 3 days without sun should make them. A grayish pale, a color I hadn't seen in my own skin before. I knew right away. The rule had said it plainly. You will begin to change. And I felt it. Not anything dramatic, no physical transformation. Just a correspondence between the cold that was now inside me and the cold outside the walls. A new connection. And behind the cold, a hunger that had nothing to do with not eating. A different wanting, directed outward toward the dark and the trees. I walked away from the pan. The stove still had coals. I got down on my knees in front of it. The orange glow was still alive at the base. I grabbed the wooden chair from the table and took the handsaw from beside the bedroom door and cut the legs off. Rough cuts, the dry old wood splitting quickly. I put 2 legs on the coals. They caught fast, dry and resinous, burning hot. The warmth came back. I sat on the floor with the blanket over my shoulders and held my hands toward the heat and felt the fire push back against whatever was waiting outside. The cold inside my chest didn't go away. The fire didn't fix what I'd done. Nothing was going to fix what I'd done. But it held the line between me and the mountain, the same line it had held for 3 nights, and I stayed behind it. The singing stopped around 2 in the morning. I burned the rest of the chair and a shelf bracket I pulled off the wall, and I sat with my back against the stove and waited for the light. It came just after 5. Gray first, then brighter. Through the window, the dirt road, the clearing, the birch trees on both sides exactly where they should be. I put my jacket on, picked up my keys, and walked out the door. I didn't pack. I left the rule sheet on the table and the pan on the counter. I got in my car and drove. I didn't look back and I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The road held for 20 miles. I drove into town just after 7 and sat in a gas station parking lot and looked at my hands in the morning light. That gray, pale color. It's still there now. I saw a doctor 2 days later. Blood work, vitals, the whole thing. Normal, she said. Except she pressed her stethoscope to the left side of my chest and her expression shifted. She moved it and listened again. There's a cold spot here, she said. Does it hurt? No, I said. I've had it since Monday. She put it in my chart. It hasn't gotten worse. It hasn't gotten better. It just sits there, a small, permanent cold above my heart that won't warm up, not in summer, not in the bath, not pressed against another person. Just cold. I still live in Boston. I still work my 9 to 5. But I'm not the same person who drove up that mountain. I feel it in me sometimes. The hunger. Not for food. For something else. Something cold. I threw away the laminated sheet before I left, but I memorized every rule. Especially the one about the meat. I broke that rule. I paid the price. The Wendigo is still up there on Bald Mountain, waiting for the next person who finds that listing. And a part of me is still up there too. A part that gets colder every day. Sometimes at night I hear singing. Faint, coming from somewhere I can't locate. And sometimes when I catch my reflection in a dark window, it smiles just a half second after I do. I'm telling this story from a hospital bed in Kyiv. The walls are white. The staff wear masks. Outside, pigeons land on the window ledge and leave again, which is more than I can say for what followed me here. I want to be clear about something. I'm not an idiot. I know what Chernobyl is. I know what happened on April 26th, 1986. I watched the HBO miniseries twice. I knew the zone was contaminated, that Pripyat had been a ghost town for 40 years, that 50,000 people were evacuated in the middle of the night and never came back. I knew all of that. I went anyway, with full knowledge of the history, because I thought I understood the risks. I was prepared for radiation. I was not prepared for what the radiation had woken up. My name is Mark Chen. I'm 29 years old. I had a travel vlog, 45,000 subscribers. Not famous. Famous enough to keep going. Famous enough to convince myself that going to places where the wrong step could kill me was a reasonable way to spend a life. I was very good at looking like someone who wasn't afraid. I was afraid all the time. My brother died 3 years ago. Danny, 24 years old. He was in the passenger seat. I was driving. I walked away from the crash with a scar on my forearm and a hollow in my chest that I've been filling ever since by pointing myself at dangerous places. It hasn't worked, but I keep going, I keep filming, I keep telling 45,000 people I'm having the time of my life, and most of the time I almost believe it. The Chernobyl booking came through Zone Escapes, luxury extreme tourism, exclusive access, private eco-lodges with panoramic views of abandoned Pripyat, $800 a night, 3 nights minimum. I spent 20 minutes looking at the photos before I hit confirm. The cabin was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, poured concrete floors with radiant heating, a full kitchen with a proper espresso machine, a freestanding tub, a king bed in white linen. It looked like something from an architecture magazine. It looked like the exact last thing you'd expect 2 kilometers from reactor number 4. I filmed my reaction for the thumbnail. Big eyes, open mouth. It did numbers before I even got on the plane. I flew into Kyiv, drove south to the zone, and met Yulia at the checkpoint. She was in her 50s, silver hair cut close, with the posture of someone who had been standing in difficult places for a long time. She wore a dark green field jacket with the Zone Escapes logo on the chest, a stylized outline of the Reactor 4 cooling towers. She shook my hand with a firm grip and smiled with the professional warmth of someone who had performed this exact greeting 100 times before. I already had my camera out. Of course I did. "Tell the people what we're doing here," I said, framing us both in the shot. She looked at the lens. Not at me. At the lens itself, like she wanted to be seen clearly. "You'll be staying at the Pripyat View Eco Lodge," she said. "Private cabin, 3-day exclusive access. The experience has been designed to be both immersive and safe, provided guests follow the property guidelines." "Provided they follow the guidelines," I repeated, grinning at the camera. "Spooky. Love it." Yulia didn't smile back. I noticed that. But I was still compositing the shot in my head, and I almost missed the way her eyes swept the tree line behind me. Not a casual glance, a scan. The kind of eyes moving in pattern sweep that people develop when they've learned from experience what they're looking for and find no comfort in not finding it. She drove me through the checkpoint and down a recently paved road through the old forest. Birch trees pressed close on both sides, pale and bare for autumn. Old structures showed through the tree line, a rusted gate, a collapsed wall, buildings absorbed back into the land over 40 years of patient growth. Pripyat was reclaiming everything. Eco-certified construction, Yulia said as we drove. Geothermal heating. The building uses ground source energy for the radiant floor system. So the heat comes from underground, I said. From below the frost line, yes. Good imagery. I was still thinking like a content creator. I didn't understand yet that some good imagery has teeth. The cabin appeared through the trees, and I said something out loud that I later cut from the footage, something unguarded and sincere. Quietly, "Oh, that's actually beautiful." It was. The Pripyat View Eco Lodge sat on a cleared platform at the forest's edge with the abandoned city spread before it like a painting. Floor-to-ceiling windows ran the full front face, and through them I could see the interior, pale concrete floors, clean kitchen lines, an enormous sectional sofa positioned to face the view. Pripyat was visible, blocky Soviet towers with empty eyes, the cultural center, and on the horizon, the rusted orange arc of the old amusement park Ferris wheel. The autumn sky was turning gold above it all, and everything in that view, the dead city, the Ferris wheel, the ghost of 50,000 ordinary lives, was rendered in that dying light. I stood before those windows and felt something genuine. Then I looked at the floor. The concrete was warm, even through my boots. The geothermal heat rose through the slab with a steady, low-grade radiance, like standing on something that was breathing. I did not think about what that meant. Not yet. Yulia's orientation was quick. Smart home controls by the front door. Lights, thermostat, blinds, cameras, full kitchen, wine rack, the bathroom, and hanging from a brass hook on the bathroom door, a square of black cloth the size of a hand towel. "For the mirror," she said. I looked at the cloth, then at the frameless mirror above the sink. "For the mirror," I repeated. "You'll read about it in the guidelines." The guidelines were a leather-bound booklet on the kitchen counter, the Zone Escapes logo embossed in silver on the cover. Thicker than I expected, 20 pages, section dividers, small diagrams. Someone had put real effort into producing it, which was either impressive or subtly alarming in the way something is alarming when the care taken implies the care is necessary. "Read it completely before sunset," she said. "All sections, including the addenda. This is a lot of reading for a vacation rental. This is not an ordinary vacation rental." She said it without inflection. Not ominous, not theatrical, just a fact stated the way you'd tell someone a stovetop was still hot. She was watching me with the patience of someone who has said something true to many people and watched most of them decide not to fully believe it. "The previous guests," she said, gathering her jacket. "The ones who didn't follow the guidelines carefully. They didn't check out on time." A pause. They didn't check out at all. I waited for her to smile. She set the key on the counter and walked toward the door. "Don't need help before I return," she said from the threshold. "Read the book. Follow the rules, exactly as written. They are not atmosphere, they are instructions." She paused at the door. "Read about the offering first, before dark." Then she was gone. Her Land Cruiser pulled away and the forest closed behind it, and I was alone in the silence, holding a leather rule book and a brass key, standing on heated floors, humming with warmth from somewhere far below. I set up my camera, hit record. "Okay," I said. "First impressions." I read the rule book in the 2 hours before sunset. 6 rules, each with a body of instructions and a subsection marked Y in bold. I read the Y sections twice. For the vlog, I filmed myself reading portions aloud. Rule 1. Close the smart blinds by 11:30 p.m. Do not open until 5 a.m. Do not investigate tapping. Do not respond if you hear your name called from outside. I looked at the camera. Okay, spooky cabin content. Love it. Rule 2. The basement door behind the pantry, sealed with an electronic lock and 3 padlocks. Do not open. Do not acknowledge knocking from behind it. If you hear your own voice calling for help, leave the cabin immediately. Rule 4 got a genuine laugh. If the playing stops and is followed by silence, that means they've chosen your cabin. Do not move. Do not breathe. I looked at the camera. The rulebook says, do not breathe, guys. I turned the camera off after that. Before the light fully died, I walked the property. The deck wrapped around the side of the cabin, giving a view of the forest edge and, beyond the birch trees to the north, the dark silhouettes of Pripyat's apartment blocks. It was during this walk that I noticed the other cabin. 200 meters through the sparse undergrowth, half hidden by pale trunks but clearly identical in construction, the same flat roof, the same panoramic windows, the same warm amber glow from inside. A thin line of smoke rose from what I assumed was a utility vent. Someone else was out here. I stared for a moment, then raised my hand in a slow wave, though the distance made any response impossible to see. I filed it away as interesting content. 2 strangers in the exclusion zone, 2 identical luxury boxes placed at careful intervals in the dead city's shadow. I went back inside before it got fully dark. The offering was Rule 6. Every night before sleep, place food on the deck railing. Not the table, the railing. Bread best. Then go inside and close the blinds and do not watch to see what took it. In the morning, the food would be gone. This meant you were tolerated. If the food remained at dawn, do not touch it. Leave through the front door, walk to the road, wait for sunrise. If the food remained untouched, they had decided you were the offering instead. I cut 2 thick slices from the sourdough loaf and carried them to the deck. The cold evening air smelled of forest and something mineral beneath it, old concrete in winter. I placed the bread on the railing, not the table, laughed quietly at myself for following the instruction with such care, and went back inside. I closed the smart blinds at 11:28 p.m., 2 minutes early. The blackout panels descended over the panoramic windows with a sound like a slow exhale. Pripyat disappeared. I was sealed inside a luxury box in the exclusion zone with warm floors and cold coffee and a rule book I no longer found amusing. I got into bed with every light in the cabin burning, turned on a podcast, something about lighthouses, the kind of voices you use as furniture, and told myself I was going to sleep. The rules were marketing. The bread on the railing was a game. I was fine. The tapping started at midnight. Almost exactly midnight. 3 taps. A pause of 4 seconds. 3 more taps. I held still. The podcast kept talking, and I told myself it was a branch. Too rhythmic for a branch, too consistent. No wind between the taps, no creak of wood, nothing that would explain the regularity. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, again and again. Then, Mark? I stopped breathing. Mark, let me in. It's so cold out here. My mother's voice, exact and unmistakable. The particular pitch of her concern, the way she softened the consonants of my name. My mother's voice, coming from directly outside the sealed smart blinds. My mother was in California. She had texted me 3 hours ago to ask if I had landed safely. I did not move. I did not breathe. I did not respond. The tapping continued. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. Patient and methodical, like something with all the time in the world. Not desperate, not trying to break through, just waiting to be let in. My mother's voice came twice more. A third voice came once, higher and shorter, that I did not try to identify. At some point, the smart blinds made a small sound. Like the mechanism was being tested from the outside, like something was learning what they were and whether they could be moved. I kept my hands flat on the duvet and my breathing slow and shallow, and I watched the ceiling until the tapping stopped. 3 a.m. Exactly 3 a.m. I didn't sleep. I lay in the fully lit cabin and listened to the absolute silence that followed and waited for the light to come. At 5 a.m., the sky visible above the top edge of the blinds shifted from black to the charcoal of early dawn. I got up. I went to the smart home panel. I raised the blinds. The deck was empty. The bread was gone from the railing. I exhaled, one long breath, and stepped close to the glass. Handprints, on the outside. Small, child-sized, covering the lower half of the window in overlapping layers. Different pressures, different sizes. Some smeared as if the hand had dragged slowly downward while the owner looked in. Dozens of them. More than dozens. I stepped back. I counted without meaning to. The smallest were no bigger than a 4-year-old's hand. The largest barely a child of 10 or 11. All of them pressed from outside, all of them pressing in. The Eco Lodge had opened in 2023, the handprints had not. I understood that clearly, the overlapping layers, the accumulation of sizes and pressures across many visits, many seasons. These hands had not come from guests pressing their faces outward to see the city. They had come from the other side, coming to whatever warmth existed in this cold, dead place, pressing themselves against the barrier, learning the shapes of the people within, coming to the glass the way cold things come to fire, not with malice, with need. The smart blinds descended by themselves then, not at my command, the mechanism activating without input, and sealed the glass and covered the handprints, and I stood on the warm concrete floor in the quiet, sealed cabin, and understood, completely and without any remaining doubt, that the rules were not atmosphere. I counted the handprints one last time before they disappeared behind the panels. They overlapped. Different sizes, different years. They'd all stood where I stood. They'd all looked in. They'd all seen something looking back. The smart blinds closed. I didn't open them again. I didn't sleep after the handprints. I lay on the sectional with the lights on and the sealed blinds between me and whatever had pressed its hands to the glass, and I listened to the floor breathe. That's the only word for it. The geothermal warmth pulsed through the concrete in slow intervals, and in the silence of a dead city, it felt deliberate, like something paying attention. By 5:30, I was on my second coffee, watching the birch trees lighten from dark gray to silver as the sky came up behind the overcast. I'd covered the bathroom mirror the night before without remembering doing it. I found the black cloth over the glass when I went in to wash my face, draped with a precision that felt like a habit I hadn't known I'd formed. I stood in the doorway and looked at it and felt something close to satisfaction. A locked door. Useful. Even against something you're not certain exists. I went to the deck door and opened it carefully. Cold air, mineral smell, the quiet of the exclusion zone. The deck was empty. The bread was gone from the railing, both slices clean. I exhaled and went back inside. Gone bread meant tolerated. 1 day down. 2 to go. By 9, I was filming. Partly professional reflex, partly the old habit of putting glass between me and the world. A camera makes the world smaller and more manageable. And I'd been using one as a distance mechanism since Danny died. I filmed the heated floors, the espresso machine, the rulebook on the counter. I filmed myself eating toast at the kitchen island, talking to the lens about the great night's sleep I'd had. I deleted that section later. I wasn't ready to lie, and I wasn't ready to tell the truth. I stepped outside and stood on the deck and looked at the main window from the outside for the first time. The handprints were still there. Faint, condensation smeared, but present. Dozens of small palm impressions at the lower half of the glass, at child height. pressed flat. In the morning light, they looked almost gentle, like someone putting a hand to a cold window to write their name. I panned my camera north along the tree line, and there was the other cabin. 200 meters through the sparse birch trunks, same flat roof, same panoramic windows, same pale concrete. The front door opened, and a figure appeared. Tall, dark jacket, holding a camera. I raised my hand. He raised his. Then he stepped off his deck and walked toward me through the trees. His name was Lev Marchenko. 34, Russian, a documentary filmmaker, personal project on the zone's mythology, its weight, why people kept coming back. High cheekbones, dark eyes, the particular calm of someone who had developed systems for functioning, regardless of what they saw. He shook my hand and looked at my camera with something short of approval. "Travel vlog?" he said. "Dark tourism," I said, as if the distinction mattered. He smiled slightly. "You'll leave thinking you understood it. You won't." It should have irritated me. Instead, it landed somewhere honest. His cabin was identical in layout. Same open plan, same heated floors, same kitchen island, same sectional facing the panoramic view. His camera gear was spread across the dining table. On the kitchen counter beside his espresso machine sat a leather-bound booklet with the Zone Escapes logo embossed in silver. He picked it up and held it out to me. "Different from yours," he said. I'd brought mine. We sat at his island and compared them side by side. The structure was identical. 6 rules, same formal register, same careful language, but the specifics diverged significantly. Rule 1 matched. Rule 6, the offering, matched. But my Rule 2 described the basement door, electronic lock, 3 padlocks, the voice from behind it. His Rule 2 described a crawl space in the utility room, sealed with 2 padlocks and a manual bolt. My Rule 4 described the deck. His Rule 4 described the roof access hatch, warning about what gathered on the roof between 1 and 3 a.m. and how to barricade it from inside. "Every cabin is different," Lev said, not reading, reciting, like something he'd already worked out. "Every foundation is different. They tailor the rules to what's underneath." "Who's they?" "Yulia. Whoever built these. Someone knows what's here. Someone has been learning it for a long time. These rules weren't written by guessing." I thought about Yulia's eyes on the tree line. The way she'd said this is not an ordinary vacation rental with no inflection at all. "Have you been in the zone before?" I said. 5 years ago. Different rental, different rules. I followed them. I survived." He looked at the tree line, the north edge of the forest behind both cabins. "My cameraman didn't. His name was Dmitri. He went out after midnight on the second night. He heard a child crying from the forest. He was soft-hearted, the kind of person who can't hear something in pain and not go toward it. I watched from the window. I followed my rules. Didn't open the door. He went into the trees. The crying stopped the moment he crossed the first line of birches." Lev picked up his coffee. "That's how I knew he was already gone, not when he disappeared. When the sound stopped. It didn't need him to come farther. It already had him." The kitchen was very quiet. The floor breathed. "He's still out there," Lev said. "Somewhere. I don't think it works like death here. Not exactly." We explored the property in the afternoon while the daylight held. Lev had already scouted the perimeter and led me along paths he'd cleared mentally, moving with the economy of someone who knew which parts of a landscape rewarded curiosity and which parts didn't. The abandoned kindergarten was 300 meters into the forest, found by smell before sight, dry rot, Soviet concrete dissolving into earth. Single-story, roof partially caved, windows long gone. Inside one empty frame, we could see the remains of a classroom. Child-height tables, still upright. A chalkboard on the far wall with Cyrillic writing neither of us moved closer to read. On a shelf beside the chalkboard, arranged with a precision that had no natural explanation, sat a row of dolls. Cloth bodies, painted porcelain faces, each one positioned to face the window where we stood. "Don't go in," Lev said without emphasis. I didn't go in. I filmed through the window frame for 30 seconds and then lowered the camera. The dolls watched with their painted eyes, and the silence around the kindergarten had a different quality from the forest silence. Thicker, more intentional, like air that had been holding its breath for 40 years and gotten very good at it. On the walk back, Lev stopped once and stood completely still. I almost walked into him. He was looking at the tree line to our left, north, where the forest deepened toward the old city's outskirts. "What?" I said. "I'm not sure." He started walking again. I looked back once. The undergrowth was still, but the stillness had a held quality, as if something had stopped moving a half-second before I turned. We separated before sunset. His last words were delivered at the point where the paths between our cabins diverged, pragmatic and final. "Follow your rules, not mine. Your rules are written for your foundation. Mine are for mine. If you try to apply my instructions to your cabin, you'll be protected for the wrong thing. Stay in your cabin. Follow your book exactly." I followed my book exactly. Cameras disabled after sunset per Rule 3, each lens covered with the opaque tape from the utility drawer. Bathroom mirror covered per Rule 5. Dinner made and eaten on the sofa with the rulebook beside me like a reference document I might need quickly. Blinds closed at 11:28 p.m. Bread on the railing at 11:40, placed on the railing and not the table, and then inside, door locked, not watching. I went to bed at midnight with every light burning. The children found my cabin at 1:09 a.m. Laughter first, light, distant, the kind the brain classifies as benign before the context catches up. Children laughing in the exclusion zone at 1 a.m., running feet on the deck boards, too quick and too light for adults. Then a voice counting, high, clear, carrying perfectly through the glass. "Odin, DVA, try. 1, 2, 3. Ready or not, here we come." I covered my face with the pillow. Rule 4. Do not look toward the sound. I pressed down and breathed through it and thought about Dimitri walking into the trees because he heard something crying, and I did not look. The counting stopped. The running stopped. The deck went silent in exactly the way the rulebook had described, the specific silence that follows a choice being made. Then, knocking on the glass deck door, low, child height. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. "We found you." The voice was gentle and pleased, the game-won satisfaction of a child who has searched and located exactly what they were looking for. "Open up. It's your turn to hide." I did not move. I did not breathe. I thought about Danny, not the accident, not the hospital, Danny before, the specific pitch of his laugh. Mark, he used to call me, which I'd hated and would give anything to hear again. 3 more knocks, higher, more insistent. "We can wait. We're very good at waiting." They were. The knocking continued in irregular bursts for almost 2 hours. Never frantic, never angry, just patient and certain, something that knew it had time. At 2:40, it stopped. The silence was absolute. I didn't move. At 3 a.m. exactly, the silence changed quality. Something released, something withdrew. I lay still for 3 more minutes to be certain, then lowered the pillow from my face and stared at the ceiling. At 3:01 a.m., Lev screamed. One sound, clean and full-throated, from the direction of his cabin, cutting through 200 meters of birch forest and the walls of my cabin both. Then, silence. Complete silence where his cabin had been. I sat up. My hand found the door handle automatically. Then I stopped. Rule 4, do not leave the cabin between 1 and 3 a.m. I checked my phone. 3:03 a.m. 2 minutes passed. 2 minutes past the window. I sat back down and put my hands on my knees and told myself I was past the window. I could go. I sat there for another 22 minutes before I believed it enough to move. At 5 a.m., I raised the blinds and stepped outside. Lev's cabin was dark. The front door stood open at a slight angle, not broken, not forced, just open the way. A door stands when someone left quickly and didn't look back. I walked the 200 meters through the birch trees in the cold gray morning and went inside. His camera was on the floor, recording light still on. I picked it up, checked the charge, 6% remaining, and played back the last footage. Timestamp: 2:52 a.m. Lev filming his own living room in the low voice of someone making a record, narrating in Russian and occasional English, every light on, rulebook open on the counter behind him. He was following his protocol. He was being careful. Then his utility room door, visible over his shoulder in the background, swung open by itself. No sound before it moved. No creak, no approach. Just closed, and then open. He turned to look. The camera caught the back of his head and his shoulders, very still, and on the floor of the utility room through the open doorway. The crawl space hatch was rising. He screamed. The camera fell. Footage ended. The final frame, caught in the half-second before the camera hit the floor, showed his smart TV in the background. Dark glass. In that dark glass, a reflection. Lev's face, positioned exactly as it should have been given the camera's angle, except in the reflection, he was smiling. Wide and still and utterly certain, the expression of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment and is very pleased it has arrived. He hadn't been smiling. He had been screaming. I backed out of his cabin without turning around, through the doorway, down the deck steps, backward across the frost-stiff grass between our cabins, eyes on his open front door until the birch trunks came between us. I did not run. I walked backwards slowly and carefully, the way you move when you don't want something to track your fear. I should not have looked back, but I did. Lev's cabin, 200 meters away through the trees, his panoramic windows facing me through the pale birch trunks, and in his smart TV, visible in the dark glass from across the distance and the cold morning air, the reflection of his living room. A figure standing in that reflection, smiling, not looking at the space where Lev had fallen, looking at me, through his window, through the glass, through my own smart blinds, which had opened by themselves while I stood watching, the blackout panels rising silently, automatically, as if something wanted me to have a clear view of what was in the glass. I backed the last 3 steps to my door and went inside. I did not look at my smart TV. I covered every reflective surface I could find. I sat on the sofa with my hands flat on my knees and Lev's rulebook in front of me beside my own, his open to Rule 4, mine to Rule 5, and I understood that whatever had been wearing Lev's face had been doing so since before I met him, maybe since his first night. And it had stood across a kitchen island from me and told me to follow my rules, and the only reason I was here and Lev was not was because I had. I opened my rulebook to Rule 2. I read it 3 times. Then I looked at the pantry. I closed the smart blinds manually. That was the first thing. Before the rulebook, before covering the reflective surfaces, before anything else. The panels had been open since whatever raised them at the end of the previous night, and I stood at the smart home panel and pressed close and watched the blackout panels descend and felt one small, specific thing: control. I held on to it. I covered every surface I could find. TV, oven glass. The bathroom mirror was already done. I used towels for the appliances, draped with the same flat finality that had become habit over 3 days. Lev's rulebook was still on the counter beside mine. 2 leather-bound booklets, one owner gone. I read Rule 2 of my own book 4 more times until I had it memorized. Electronic lock, 3 padlocks. Don't open. Don't acknowledge knocking. If you hear crying, do not investigate. If you hear your own voice calling for help, leave the cabin immediately. I turned that last line over carefully. My own voice, not Lev's, mine. The bread was still on the railing. I stepped out in the early gray light to check it, and I already knew. Both slices, exactly as I'd placed them the night before, untouched. I stood on the frost-covered deck for one breath, and then stepped back inside and locked both the door lock and the secondary bolt. The rulebook's language came automatically. Do not touch it. Leave the cabin immediately. Walk to the road. I tried that option next. I tried Yulia first. 4 calls, 1 ring each, voicemail. Texts sent with the thin signal I had left. Then the car. The rental SUV was in the gravel pull-off exactly where I'd left it. The key fob worked. The engine turned over, caught for 2 seconds, died. Again, caught, died. I tried 8 times. Fuel gauge read 3/4 full. The engine would start and then cut as if something had removed its permission to run. I sat in the cold car and looked at the access road stretching through the birch trees and understood. 12 kilometers to the checkpoint. The dark would come before I got there on foot. The rulebook was clear about what owned the dark. I went back inside. Yulia had said noon on day 4. That was tomorrow, 18 hours. I spent the day in the arithmetic of survival, inventorying the kitchen, reading the rulebook addenda I'd only skimmed on the first night. 2 pages of smaller print, different tone, a second author's voice. They described the zone's accommodation reflex, how entities adjusted to new structures, and stated that the 3rd night was always the worst. I put the book down and made dinner early and placed bread on the railing at 5:30 p.m., hours before necessary, because I was not going to get the offering wrong. I said nothing. I placed it on the railing, not the table, and went back inside without looking at the city. At 11:20 p.m., I closed the smart blinds, 8 minutes early. At 8:13 p.m., I heard Lev's voice from the pantry. I was on the sofa with both rule books when it came. His voice, low and urgent, muffled by the pantry wall, but unmistakably his cadence, his accent, his way of starting sentences mid-thought. "Mark, I'm down here. They took me. I'm in the dark and I can't." I stopped breathing. Behind the pantry shelving unit, the basement door, electronic lock, 3 padlocks. I knew it was a trap. I knew it the way you know a stove is hot before you touch it, not from calculation, but from something older. I knew it was the zone using what it had found in Lev, the same way it had used my mother's voice on the first night. I sat still, and I did not speak, and I heard the rulebook in my head. Do not acknowledge it. If you hear crying, do not investigate. Mark, please. They're close. Open the door. We can run. I thought about Lev's camera footage, the timestamp at 2:52 a.m. on night 2. The crawl space hatch rising, his reflection smiling in the TV while he screamed. Whatever had come up through his foundation had not been Lev for at least 36 hours. But I stood up. I am telling you this honestly. I walked to the pantry and put my hand on the doorframe, and I listened to his voice. The exact voice that had said, "Follow your rules, not mine," with the tone of someone who actually wanted me to survive. And the guilt moved through me like a current. When he screamed at 3:01 a.m., I had sat on my bed and waited 22 minutes because the rules said to. I had followed the rules, and Lev was gone. "Mark," his voice dropped lower. "I know you're there. I can hear you breathing. Just open the door. That's all." I opened the pantry. The shelving unit was exactly as described in the orientation, and behind it, set into the wall, the door. Heavy steel, painted gray. The electronic lock mounted at eye height, red indicator light on, a quiet rhythmic beeping, patient and counting. 3 padlocks in a vertical row, each the size of my fist. Open it. His voice came from directly behind the door now, close enough that I could almost believe there was nothing between us but steel. I've been down here so long, you know I'm real. My hand went to the first padlock. I held its weight. The floor was warm beneath my feet. His voice was so precisely, exactly Lev's. The consonants, the rhythm, the particular flatness of his English, and the rational part of my brain was producing reasons why it might be real. He'd survived, found the tunnels, reached the basement access. He was right there. Then the voice said, "Mark, help me. I can't get out. Mark, please, help me. I can't get out." Not Lev's voice. My voice. My own pitch. My own intonation, the exact register I use when I'm scared and trying not to show it. One voice had become another without a seam. The transition had been smooth enough that I hadn't noticed it until it was complete. I let go of the padlock. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door and I walked out of the cabin. I did not run. I closed the front door behind me and I stood on the frost-covered gravel in the dark and I counted. The rulebook said 10 minutes. I counted to 600. I looked at the gravel between my feet and did not look at the cabin windows and did not look at the tree line and counted, and at 600 I went back inside. The pantry door was closed, the shelving unit flush against the wall, the electronic lock dark. No indicator, no beeping, silence from behind the door, as if whatever had been there had packed and left the moment I walked out. When you return, the sounds will stop. They had. I looked through the deck glass at the railing. The bread was still there, untouched. 8:47 p.m. I called Yulia one more time, voicemail after one ring. I sat with the untouched bread visible through the glass, and I understood what it meant with a clarity that had no room for negotiation. The zone had refused payment. It had decided it wanted something else. They've decided you're the offering now. The phone rang. Unknown number. I answered on the first ring. "You called." Yulia's voice, clear, professional, without inflection. "That many times means something went wrong. Tell me." I told her everything. Lev, the footage, the voice from the pantry, both voices, his and then mine, the untouched bread. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, the professional warmth was still present, but underneath it was something more fundamental. The focus of someone doing necessary work. "You're in trouble, but not dead. Those are different things out there. Listen carefully and do exactly what I say in exactly the order I say it." A pause. Under the bathroom sink. Emergency kit. White box. Orange lid. "Get it now. Don't hang up." I found it behind the cleaning supplies. White plastic box. Orange lid. Inside, a folded gas mask. A small amber bottle of tablets labeled in Ukrainian, a mason jar of black soil, coarse and dark, sealed with wax at the edge. I described each item. "Good, open the bottle. Swallow 2 tablets, just 2. They burned going down, sharply medicinal, left a cold, bitter trace. The mask, over your face, don't seal the straps yet. Soil in your left coat pocket, not the right, left." I did each thing as she named it. "Now cut 2 slices of bread, go to the deck, place them on the railing, then say aloud, 'I am a guest. I mean no harm. I offer what I have. Say it clearly. Come back inside and tell me what happens.' Rule 1 says, 'It's not midnight and this is not the same as looking. Go.'" I placed the bread on the railing, and I stood in the cold, black air with the dead city spread before me, and I said the 3 sentences clearly, like a knock that was asking permission rather than demanding entry. I watched the bread for a full minute. "It didn't take," I told her. Another pause, shorter this time. "All right, seal the mask straps. Go to the utility closet at the back of the hallway. There's a telescoping ladder on the wall. At the end of the hallway, there's a roof hatch. Latch lock. Opens inward. I need you on the roof. Yulia, the roof is open sky. Whatever follows you up there cannot cross into it. It doesn't belong to any of them, but it will wait at the hatch. Once you're up, you cannot come back down alone. Stay in the center of the roof. Don't approach the edges. Don't look over the edge. Don't look down at the hatch once you've stepped away from it. I found the ladder. I extended it in the hallway, climbed it with the mask fogging at the edges and the jar of soil heavy in my left pocket, and I pushed the hatch open and pulled myself through. The roof. Flat, 12 by 15 meters, low lip at the edge. The zone spread in every direction in the cold dark. Pripyat on 3 sides, forest on the 4th, and to the south, the Ferris wheel and the dark mass of the reactor enclosure 2 kilometers away. I stood in the center of the roof, and the cold pressed through the mask, and I held the phone. "I'm up," I said. "Good. Stay in the center. I'm already driving. I'll be there before dawn. Don't respond to anything from the hatch or the edges. Nothing at all." The signal held for 11 minutes. Then the line dropped. I stood in the center of the roof and waited. The scratching started at 1:14 a.m., at the hatch, fingernails on painted metal, patient and exploratory. Then Lev's voice rising through the opening from the hallway below. "Mark, let me up. It's cold down here. I can see the sky." I didn't respond. I watched the Ferris wheel. At 1:40, a child's voice from the hatch, the same voice that had said we found you on the second night. "We found you again. You can play up here." At 2:15, my mother's voice, rising from somewhere below. "Mark, I came all this way. Let me in." I turned away from the hatch. I faced north toward the forest, and I thought about Danny, not the accident, but before, teaching me to drive, patient about it in a way he wasn't patient about anything else, because it meant getting out of the house, the way he'd looked at me when I passed the test. I pressed my hands flat against my coat pockets, and I stood still, and I let the voices cycle. Lev, the child, my mother, something speaking Ukrainian, urgent and soft, as if I had failed something specific. I did not respond to any of them. The scratching continued in the intervals, patient and learning. At 4:30 a.m., the scratching stopped. Not faded, stopped, like a door closing on the other side. The voices stopped with it. The silence that followed was clean and high, different from the night silences below, and I understood what Yulia had meant. Open sky was genuinely neutral, and the entity's absence in it was not reluctance, but incapacity. I stood in the center and waited. At 5:03 a.m., headlights cut through the birch trees on the access road. Yulia was on the roof in 4 minutes, dark jacket, silver hair, Zone Escapes logo, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this before and was grimly unsurprised to be doing it again. She grabbed my arm. "Down. Don't look at the hatch when we pass it." We descended fast. Hatch latched behind us. Through the hallway, past the pantry without looking, past the rulebooks on the counter, out through the front door and into the Land Cruiser, and moving before I'd fully closed my door. I looked back once as the forest closed behind us. The roof hatch was open. She had latched it from above. It was open. A figure stood at its edge. Lev's height, Lev's jacket, Lev's posture, raising one hand in a slow, certain wave. The wave of something that knows exactly where you're going and has all the time in the world to wait. Behind him, smaller figures lined the parapet. 4, 5, more. Children shapes, still and smiling, watching the Land Cruiser the way children watch something interesting through a window. I faced forward. Yulia didn't speak until we hit the checkpoint. She stopped the car, and when she looked at me, her eyes had the same quality as the first day. Scanning, assessing, recording. "You followed the rules," she said. "That's why you're here. Lev didn't. That's why he's still there. Don't ask about him again. Don't look at the photos you took. Don't watch your footage." She paused. Some things don't want to be seen, and once they're seen, they don't let go. I nodded. I didn't look back, but I felt them watching. I still feel them watching. The hospital was white, the particular white of a government facility, Not warm cream, but the white of surfaces cleaned because they have to be. Clean in a way that implies what they've held before. I lay in a bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the machines measure things about me I couldn't measure myself. I'm alive. I followed the rules, and I'm alive. Someone had taken the gas mask. The jar of black soil was on the bedside table. Someone had moved it from my coat pocket and placed it there, and I reached for it without thinking, the way you reach for a phone. The wax seal was intact. The soil was dark and cold and still. The staff wore respirators, standard protocol for zone extraction cases. They asked logistical questions. What time did you enter? What route? Did you consume food or water from the property? I answered everything. They wrote it down and came back the next day with the same questions, and the day after, and by the fourth repetition, I understood they weren't checking my answers against what I'd said before. They were checking them against something else, some other account of the same place, some other person's version of the same 3 days. The officials came on the third day, a man and a woman in civilian clothes that didn't fit right, the ill fit of people who usually wear uniforms. They placed a recording device on the tray table, and the man said, "You were in the exclusion zone in an unauthorized structure. The rental company is under investigation. You're lucky to be alive." I told them everything, from the checkpoint forward, Yulia, the rule book, the heated floors, the beauty of the cabin, and how it made the rules easier to ignore and then impossible to. The first night, my mother's voice at the glass, the handprints. The second day, Lev, 2 rule books compared across a kitchen island, the abandoned kindergarten. The second night, the children counting on the deck, Lev's scream at 3:01 a.m., the footage with the crawl space hatch rising, and Lev's reflection smiling in the TV when he hadn't been. The third day, untouched bread, the car failing, the voice from behind the basement door that started as Lev's and ended as mine. Leaving. Counting to 600 in the dark, the roof, the hatch, the scratching, the voices, Yulia at 5:03 a.m. They listened. They wrote things down. They did not react. Not to the handprints, not to the voice that became my own, not to the hatch opening after Yulia had latched it. They had the composure of people for whom this was not new information. The woman said, "Yulia has been operating as an extraction guide for 20 years. In that time, she's managed 18 emergency extractions. Every guest who followed the rules survived. Every guest who did not, did not." "I followed the rules," I said. "Yes, that's why you're here." Lev followed his rules. He had a rule book. He read it. He compared it with mine. Lev Marchenko did not follow his rules. The man's voice was measured. His Rule 2 addressed the crawl space in his utility room, sealed with 2 padlocks and a manual bolt. Security footage from the cabin's exterior camera shows him in that utility room at 11:47 p.m. on his first night. Not his second, his first. I sat with that. His first night. The same night I'd heard my mother's voice at the glass and held the smart blinds closed. "He told me he'd followed the rules," I said, when we compared rule books. "He described Rule 2 correctly." What was in his cabin when you met him was not Lev Marchenko. Lev Marchenko broke Rule 2 on his first night. What came up through his crawl space wore what it found. What sat across from you at the kitchen island already knew the rules because it had access to the rule book. It told you to follow your rules because you staying in your cabin, staying manageable, staying predictable, meant you were within reach for when it was ready. The room was very quiet. I thought about the kitchen island, the 2 rule books side by side, the coffee. "Follow your rules, not mine," said with the exact tone of someone who actually wanted me to survive. The thing had used that tone because the real Lev had used it, and it had all of him to work from. "Lev's reflection," I said. The last frame on the camera. He was smiling. He wasn't smiling when he screamed. His reflection was the last place the original consciousness was legible. The entity had taken everything else. The reflection lagged. That is consistent with other cases. I thought about that without speaking. The real Lev had still been in the glass in that last half second. The smile, not the entity's, because the entity was behind the camera, screaming. The smile was Lev, using the only movement available to him, in the only surface still honest. Maybe trying to show me something. Maybe glad to be seen, even then. The woman opened a laptop and turned it toward me. Satellite imagery. The two cabins from above, cleared land, access roads, forest edge, the dead city's grid beyond. My cabin looked like a cabin. Clear space around it. Lev's cabin was surrounded. Not 2 or 3 figures. Dozens, still, at varying distances. Some at the railing, some on the road, some at the forest edge. All of them waiting with the patience of things that did not experience time the way things with a pulse did. "When was this taken?" I said. "The morning after your extraction." I looked at my cabin on the screen. Empty. I had followed the rules and the zone had nothing left to wait for. Lev's cabin still had everything. "The luxury cabins," I said. "Zone escapes. The whole operation." "A mistake," the man said without inflection, as though he'd said the same word about the same thing many times. "Beautiful construction, heated floors, panoramic views, built directly over the most active subsurface structures in the zone, structures that predate the disaster, in some cases predate the city. The developers submitted no geological survey, no consultation with relevant authorities." He paused. "They chose not to know. There is a difference. We have 40 years of documentation ahead of us." I thought about the geothermal warmth pulsing through the concrete. A gift from below. Accept the warmth. Do not ask where it comes from. Someone had known. Someone had written that line, knowing exactly what was underneath. "The basement," I said. "What's down there?" The original building's basement connects to the maintenance tunnels. In April 1986, 11 liquidators entered those tunnels for the initial containment operation. 3 came back, the ones who turned around first. The 8 who continued are still working. The tunnels are their perimeter. Your cabin's concrete slab is their ceiling. He looked at his folded hands. The electronic lock on the basement door is not there to keep you out. It is there to keep the door locked from the inside. I lay still and thought about 3 days of walking across their ceiling. 3 days of cooking and talking and filming. 8 men in the dark beneath me who had been searching for 40 years, who had finally heard footsteps directly above their heads and had been, in their patient and thorough way, very interested. They ran tests for a week. Radiation came back normal every time. On the 6th day, the doctor came in and sat at the end of my bed and said, "Your radiation panels are clear. There are some secondary markers slightly elevated. We'd like to monitor them at 6-month intervals." "What markers?" I said. She named several things in Ukrainian and translated them into medical English I didn't fully follow. When I asked what it meant in plain terms, she said it was too early to characterize and monitoring was appropriate. She said monitoring in a way that meant something specific, and I did not ask what, because I had heard 3 days of specific language, and I understood that some things would not be named, even when people were looking directly at them. I flew home from Kiev on a Tuesday, watched Ukraine shrink below the clouds. The soil jar was in my carry-on, wrapped in a t-shirt. I tried to vlog when I got home, opened my laptop, loaded the cabin footage. I opened the first file. Every frame had figures in it, not replacing my footage. Mine was there, the espresso machine, the rule book on the counter, the deck railing, but present alongside it, in the background of every shot where the light was low, at the windows, in the reflective surfaces. Figures watching. Present in every frame the way background noise is present in audio. You don't notice it until you listen for it, and once you notice it, you can never not notice it again. I deleted the channel. All of it. The Chernobyl content, the previous videos, the subscriber count. 4 minutes, and it was done. I closed the laptop and sat at my kitchen table and looked at the wall. I got a job. Data entry, quiet office, regular hours. I called my mother on Sundays. She asked about the trip, and I said I'd come back early. I was done with extreme content. She said she was glad. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I didn't think I could give her that and have it be a kindness. The nights were harder. Reflections moved wrong in certain lights. Not always, not reliably, but sometimes, in the bathroom mirror's edge through the cloth I'd hung over it, in the black face of my switched-off laptop, in windows when the inside light was on and the street was dark outside. My own face in the glass with the slight, almost imperceptible quality of something performing itself rather than being itself. I had been learning not to look since Pripyat, and I got better at it every day. 3 months after I came home, on a night in January, with snow outside the window I was not looking at, someone knocked on my door. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. A child's voice, clear through the door. "Mark, we found you. Open up. It's your turn to hide." I was on the sofa. I set my phone face down and placed my hands flat on my knees, and I did not move, and I did not breathe, and I thought about the rulebook. Do not move. Do not breathe. Do not make a sound. They will wait until 3 a.m. At 3 a.m., they will leave. They always leave at 3 a.m. The knocking continued, never frantic, patient, and certain. Something with all the time available to it. At 3 a.m., it stopped. I sat until 3:30, made coffee, waited. At 5 a.m., I went to the window. On the glass. The outside of my 3rd-floor window on a city street with no balcony, no ledge, no way for any person to reach. A handprint. Small, child-sized, pressed flat against the glass from outside. I stood and looked at it for a long time. Then I got the rule book from the drawer where I'd been keeping it, and I read Rule 4 again, and I understood that the rules had not ended in Pripyat. They had followed me home. The zone knew where I was. Yulia had said so at the checkpoint, and I had nodded and thought she meant something metaphorical. She had not. I called her number, just to hear her voice. It rang twice, then voicemail. "You have reached Yulia. If you're calling, you survived. Congratulations. But they'll always know where you are now. The zone doesn't let go, it just waits. I'm still driving, still rescuing, still losing some. Follow the rules, even at home, especially at home. Goodbye, Mark." I listened 3 times. On the 4th try, the call disconnected. Number not in service. My recent calls showed unknown. The voicemail inbox was empty. I still have the soil. The jar sits on my nightstand. Black soil from the zone, coarse and dense behind the wax-sealed glass. I reach for it the way you reach for a phone. Some nights it's warm, not room temperature, but warm the way something is warm when heat comes from inside it rather than the air around it. On those nights I sit with the lights on and wait for morning with the jar in my lap, and in the morning it's cold again and I go to work. Some nights it whispers. I don't listen. I don't look at reflections after dark. I don't answer knocks. I follow the rules. Even here. Especially here. The zone is inside me now. It's in the soil, in the quiet moments when I almost forget. I never forget. That's the rule. That's the only rule that matters now. Remember. Always remember. Because if I forget, they'll remind me. And their reminders last forever. Sometimes I wonder if Lev is still waving, still smiling, still waiting on that roof. I think he is. I think he'll always be there. And I think the real Lev, the one who survived the first time, who watched Dmitri walk into the trees and didn't follow. I think he tried to tell me something in that last frame. I think that was him in the glass, using the only thing still available to him. I think what he was saying was, "You saw it, now you know. Follow the rules." And somewhere in Pripyat, in a cabin with heated floors and a fully stocked kitchen and a panoramic view of a city that has been dead for 40 years, the basement door is rattling. 3 padlocks, 3 knocks, 3 chances to answer. The next guest won't have Yulia's number. The next guest won't have the rules. The next guest won't last the night. But that's not my problem anymore. I'm home. I'm safe. I'm following the rules. And I never, ever look at the windows after dark.